Julie Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Keown, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of two children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, they adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies. While Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development, James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward, hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced. Albeit less severe than before, her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. in an unexpected breakthrough. A nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration, helpless to do anything but wait. They watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding, items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Keown, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing.
Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Christopher Wilder. Some criminals leave a lasting mark on the criminal world, not only due to their brutality, but also because of the sophisticated methods they use to cover up their crimes. Today's story is about a series of mysterious murders that once shook America. Where dreams become nightmares, Elizabeth Kenyon, a 23-year-old aspiring model, had big dreams. She competed as a finalist in a beauty pageant in Florida, unfortunately. Her beautiful journey was tragically cut short on March 5, 1984. Elizabeth disappeared without a trace, worried. Her parents immediately contacted the Miami police to report her missing. However, as is often the case, the authorities downplayed their concerns. Claiming there was no need to worry yet, they suggested Elizabeth might be out celebrating her pageant success with friends or a boyfriend. The police advised the family to wait 24 hours before filing an official missing persons report. But her parents knew this wasn't like Elizabeth. She wasn't the type to party and always made sure to inform others of her plans. A day passed, but the police still made no move to solve her disappearance. Her mother, however, had a strong feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Ultimately, her parents decided to hire a private investigator, together with Elizabeth's parents. The detective visited the apartment Elizabeth had been renting, hoping to uncover any clues. After searching the apartment, they found two notable items: an address book and a photo album. The album contained several pictures of Elizabeth's friends, while a small note inside detailed her schedule for the day she went missing. The note mentioned a planned meeting with a photographer at a specific address. When the investigator followed up on the lead, the building concierge confirmed seeing Elizabeth on the day she disappeared. She had been accompanied by a man. The detective soon discovered that the man she was scheduled to meet was Christopher Wilder. A 38-year-old who had been in a relationship with Elizabeth, Christopher had even proposed to her. But Elizabeth had declined, citing concerns about their age difference, on March 11, just 6 days after Elizabeth went missing. The detective contacted Christopher to ask him some questions about her disappearance. Christopher claimed he had no idea where Elizabeth might be. The detective then arranged an in-person meeting with Christopher. During their calm conversation, Christopher showed the detective some of his photography. Nothing incriminating or suspicious surfaced, except for one particular photo of Elizabeth. In the image, she appeared visibly frightened, which the seasoned detective found unusual. Christopher explained that they had only done a short photo session on the day in question, after which Elizabeth supposedly left with an unidentified man. Still, the detective decided to investigate Christopher further. Christopher Wilder was born on March 13, 1945, in Sydney, New South Wales, to an Australian mother, June Wilder, and an American father, Coley Chapman Wilder. Who was a naval officer, Christopher was the oldest of 4 sons. His life was challenging from the start. Christopher was nearly stillborn and is believed to have nearly drowned in a swimming pool at the age of 2. These incidents were only the beginning of his troubled life. On January 4, 1963, when Christopher was 17, he and 2 friends had abused and assaulted a 13-year-old girl at a quarry, while all 3 denied involvement. Christopher was sentenced to probation. He later claimed that he underwent electroshock therapy as part of a rehabilitation program. Some experts speculated that this treatment could have been a traumatic experience, potentially worsening his mental state and contributing to his later violent behavior. However, no concrete evidence of this therapy has ever been found. It's also possible that Christopher fabricated this story to justify his actions. A journalist even suggested that another claim about nearly drowning in a swimming pool was also false. As Christopher's parents did not confirm it, these accounts may have been Christopher's attempts to gain sympathy. In 1968, Christopher got married, but his wife left him after just 1 week. The incident occurred after Christopher was arrested on suspicion of multiple abuse offenses at Manly Beach, Australia, following their divorce. His ex-wife informed the authorities that she believed Christopher had attempted to seduce her mother and another relative shortly after their marriage. She also discovered photographs of women in lingerie in his work briefcase and car, suggesting an obsessive fixation on women. Additionally, she suspected that he had twice attempted to strangle her during intimate moments, possibly with the intent to kill her in November of the same year. Christopher used the sensitive photos to blackmail a nursing student in Australia into having intimate relations with him, although the woman reported the incident to the police. The case was dropped because she refused to testify later. She revealed that her fear of retaliation from Christopher, whom she already perceived as unstable, had prevented her from coming forward. After emigrating to the United States, Christopher began a new chapter in his life, one that would eventually lead to his dark crimes, a resourceful. He entered the real estate business and achieved notable success, amassing a substantial fortune. With his newfound wealth, he purchased a luxurious waterfront mansion in the prestigious Boynton Beach area, located 25 miles south of Palm Beach. Along with a Porsche 911 and a boat, Christopher also developed a passion for car racing, participating in the Miami Grand Prix and embracing an extravagant lifestyle during this period. He frequently vacationed in Hawaii and the Bahamas. It was also during this time that he developed a strong interest in photography. He invested in high-end photography equipment to enhance the quality of his work and even converted a room in his mansion into a darkroom to fully immerse himself in the hobby. However, he was driven by other impulses, vastly different from art. Between 1971 and 1975, Christopher repeatedly became the focus of investigations related to abuse offenses. On one occasion, he lured a young woman into his pickup truck under the pretense of photographing her for a modeling agency. Of course, this was a lie, and the girl became a victim of brutal abuse. Despite numerous allegations from his victims, Christopher was never held accountable for his crimes. In 1977, a psychiatrist who evaluated him concluded that he was mentally ill. The psychiatrist considered him dangerous, recommended that he remain under constant medical supervision and participate in a specialized treatment program, according to the expert. Christopher harbored an obsessive desire to dominate women, degrade them to the level of slaves, and inflict pain and injuries. However, the psychiatrist's conclusions did not result in any legal consequences, and Christopher was acquitted by the jury on April 13, 1980. A 17-year-old girl named Carla Hendry from Beverly, Massachusetts, escaped from an attack and provided law enforcement with details about the perpetrator's vehicle. However, no action was taken. In 1982, while visiting his parents in Australia, Christopher was accused of an abuse offense involving two 15-year-old girls from Manly. He had lured them to a remote area and forced them to pose sensitively. Thankfully, the girls were not seriously harmed and were able to identify him. Leading to his arrest, Christopher's parents posted bail for him, and he was even permitted to return to Florida while awaiting his legal proceedings, which were scheduled for April 1984 during the investigation of Elizabeth's case. Authorities uncovered a connection to another case, just 7 days before Elizabeth disappeared. A 20-year-old woman named Rosario Teresa Gonzalez went missing during the Miami Grand Prix. Christopher, a racing enthusiast, had attended the event. Rosario, a model working for a marketing company, had been handing out flyers and promotional items at the event. She vanished shortly after the race. It was later revealed that she had agreed to a photography session with Christopher, who had driven off in his Porsche. The circumstances strongly suggested that Christopher was involved in the disappearances of both women. On March 12, 1984, Elizabeth's parents sought help from an FBI special agent specializing in homicide investigations at the Miami office. Frustrated by law enforcement's lack of interest in the case, The family hired a private investigator and reached out to the Miami Herald to raise public awareness about Elizabeth's disappearance, hoping to provoke a response from the suspected abductor. On March 16, 1984, the newspaper published an article claiming significant progress in the investigation. Though it did not mention Christopher by name, the article briefly described the suspect as an Australian, a race car driver, and an amateur photographer. The intention was to prompt a reaction from Christopher. Law enforcement finally began paying closer attention to these cases after the publicity surrounding them. When agents reviewed the evidence, they quickly noticed a suspicious link between the two missing women, Elizabeth and Rosario, and their scheduled photography sessions with a man named Christopher. A background check revealed that Christopher had a long history of legal issues in Australia. At the time, he was on probation for an abuse charge and awaiting a new trial. This discovery gave the FBI grounds to open a full investigation on March 20, around the same time. They received a report from Linda Grover, 19, about an attempted kidnapping. Linda described being attacked by a man who tried to abduct her, seemingly intending to keep her captive or abuse her as a slave. Thankfully, she managed to escape. Her description of the attacker matched Christopher exactly. An FBI agent immediately interviewed Linda. She said, while she was working, a man approached her, complimented her appearance, and offered her a modeling opportunity, claiming to be a fashion photographer. He invited her to his car to view his portfolio. Linda declined and walked away, but the man persisted. He followed her in his car, urging her to go to a park with him for a quick photo session. Promising to pay her $25, Linda refused again and went into the store. When Linda stepped outside, the man approached her again, although he appeared friendly. She sensed a sinister presence about him that made her uncomfortable. She scanned the area for anyone who might help if needed, but the place was deserted. Christopher tried to convince her to join him for a photo shoot, opening his car to show her fashion magazines. This all occurred in broad daylight in a public setting. Suddenly, Christopher struck Linda on the head, knocking her unconscious. When Linda woke up, she was immobilized and lying in the back seat of a car. She began crying, which enraged Christopher. He stopped the car, taped her mouth shut with duct tape, and forced her into the trunk. He then drove to Glen Oaks Motel. Once there, he stuffed her into a sack. Restricting her movement entirely, Christopher glued her eyelids shut with super glue, tied her up, and abused her to hours of torture. Using a stun weapon to shock her whenever she resisted, his cruelty convinced Linda that she wouldn't survive. However, at one point, when Christopher became distracted, Linda managed to free herself and hide in the bathroom. She banged on the walls and screamed for help as loudly as she could. The noise scared Christopher, and he fled later. When an FBI agent showed Linda photographs of Christopher, she trembled and confidently identified him as her abductor. Linda eventually became a key witness in the case. However, the investigation progressed very slowly. Within a week, Linda had to leave the state out of fear for her safety. She was placed under FBI protection and relocated to a secret location. Law enforcement soon realized they were dealing with a violent and dangerous individual linked to multiple crimes. It took her more than 30 years to recover from the trauma she suffered. During that time, Linda earned a doctoral degree and frequently spoke to the media, sharing the story of her miraculous escape at the time of her abduction. Linda didn't fully comprehend how fortunate she was to survive, despite her fear. She was determined to ensure the criminal was imprisoned for a long time meanwhile. Authorities needed more evidence to charge Christopher with the abductions of Rosario and Elizabeth. Police secured a search warrant for Christopher's home and arrived with FBI agents. They broke down the door and found the house empty. Christopher had fled days earlier. A massive manhunt was launched to locate him. Investigators thoroughly searched the house, but Christopher had meticulously cleaned it, leaving behind no fingerprints or evidence. Interviews with neighbors revealed that Christopher had disappeared immediately after the Glen Oaks motel incident, likely realizing the police were closing in and would soon come for him. On March 23rd, in Canaveral Groves, the body of 21-year-old Teresa Ann Ferguson was found. She had last been seen at a shopping mall with a man resembling Christopher. Investigators discovered that Teresa had been beaten with a blunt object and then strangled to death. The method of the attack matched Christopher's profile, raising the victim count to 4. FBI agents concluded they were dealing with a serial killer and feared he could strike again at any moment. Immediate action was critical that same day. Alarming news arrived the day before the raid on Christopher's home. He had been seen at a local bank withdrawing a large amount of cash. This was a serious setback because it meant he now had the resources to travel across the country, pay in cash, and avoid detection with a 24-hour head start. He could already be anywhere before. On March 21, Christopher was seen in Texas, specifically in the parking lot of Lamar University in Beaumont. Witnesses reported that he was speaking with a young woman named Terry Diane Walden, a nursing student who was married and had 2 children. Christopher tried to lure her with an offer for a photo shoot, a tactic he often used. But Terry politely declined. Thankfully, he did not forcefully abduct her at that moment, sparing her life for the time being, however. This safety was short-lived. Later, at a supermarket, Christopher, essentially waiting for Terry, approached her again. He repeated his photo shoot offer. This time, in a more menacing tone, Terry refused once more. But Christopher was determined. He followed her through the store and into the parking lot, where he struck her on the head and abducted her. The FBI issued statements as they pursued this dangerous criminal, but he always seemed to stay about 2 days ahead of them. According to agents from the Miami office, a press release was issued describing Christopher's car, which he had used to kidnap Terry, unfortunately. The car was a common model, and without a license plate number, the information was not very helpful. Terry's profile was distributed across the country, but the slower communication technology of the time delayed the spread of alerts. The FBI had no choice but to follow the grim trail of bodies Christopher left behind. On March 25th, at Penn Square Shopping Mall in Oklahoma City, he abducted 21-year-old Suzanne Wendy Logan. He then drove her to a motel in Newton, Kansas, the next morning. After breakfast, he took her to Milford Reservoir, where he stabbed her to death and left her body there. 2 days later, a fisherman discovered her body. The investigation revealed she had been tortured, abused, and murdered in a particularly horrific manner. On March 28th, the FBI received a promising lead on Christopher when they discovered he had rented a hotel room in Colorado using a stolen credit card. This allowed authorities to track his movements. However, officers only learned about this payment the day after the room was booked. Acting quickly, all available police officers, along with FBI agents, rushed to the motel to apprehend Christopher, but he was already gone, although their efforts narrowed the gap in their pursuit to about 1 day. It provided little reassurance, as Christopher's direction of travel remained unknown. Christopher's next sighting occurred at a shopping mall in Grand Junction, Colorado, where he was seen talking to an 18-year-old woman named Cheryl Lynn Bonaventura. Witnesses later observed the two together at a diner. where they mentioned plans to travel to Las Vegas around March 31st. Christopher attacked Cheryl near the Kanab River in Utah. Her body was discovered on May 3rd. This incident led law enforcement to identify malls as his preferred locations for targeting victims. Christopher portrayed himself as a polished and credible individual, dressing in elegant suits and grooming his mustache and beard meticulously. He carried business cards, wore a large diamond ring on the pinky of his left hand, a gold Rolex watch, and a Pentax camera slung over his shoulder. Creating the image of a successful and respectable man, he used his charm and the pretense of being a professional photographer, searching for aspiring models to lure his victims, while also disarming the suspicions of security personnel and mall staff. Despite law enforcement distributing his photos and descriptions to shopping malls and supermarkets nationwide, Christopher continued moving across the country in search of new victims. On April 1st, Christopher Wilder's next victim was Michelle Lynn Korfman, a 17-year-old girl abducted at Meadows Shopping Mall in Las Vegas. Christopher had attended a photography event at the mall, where he approached Michelle and offered her an opportunity to become his first professional model. When the FBI learned about the incident and began investigating the mall, they collected photographs from event attendees, some of which showed Michelle with Christopher. Several images captured him selecting her as his target and following her. Michelle's body was discovered on May 11th, according to forensic analysis results. Her abductor had restrained and tortured her over an extended period. He sealed her mouth and eyes with superglue, abused her, and inflicted deep cuts while she was still alive. The wounds, approximately 3 centimeters deep, were not fatal, but caused her immense pain. The hunt continued. On April 4, 16-year-old Tina Marie Rizzico from California became Christopher's next victim. She had gone to a shopping mall in search of a summer job, hoping to save enough money to buy a new car to replace the old one her father had given her. At the mall, Christopher approached her, complimented her appearance, and offered her $100 in cash for a photo shoot, hoping to earn some extra money. Tina agreed. They went to a nearby park, where she willingly posed, expecting to receive her payment. However, Christopher suddenly pulled out a weapon and forced her into his car. She had no choice but to comply. Christopher drove Tina to a motel in San Diego, where she was subjected to hours of brutal torture. He cut her with a knife, electrocuted her, beat her, and alternated these horrific acts with abuse assault when Tina disappeared. The FBI issued a special bulletin and held a press conference. By this time, Christopher Wilder had become the most wanted fugitive in the United States. Tina was his 7th known victim. With at least 6 others already confirmed, Christopher's name and crimes were being discussed on television, in newspapers, and on the radio. The FBI hoped this extensive media coverage would lead to his capture. In the spring of 1984, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. Despite their efforts, Tina remained missing. Authorities hoped she might still be alive, but in reality, she was enduring unimaginable suffering. On the 6th day of captivity, Christopher told Tina he would set her free if she helped him lure in his next victim. Desperate to survive, Tina agreed. Christopher had already chosen his next target, Dawnette Sue Wilt, a young woman who worked part-time handing out flyers in supermarkets. He forced Tina to pretend she was looking for work in order to convince Dawnette to get into his car. The plan worked, and several witnesses reported seeing an unknown man leaving an Indiana shopping center with 2 women. The man's description matched Christopher, whose face was now widely recognized across the country, despite promising Tina her freedom. Christopher refused to release her and forced her to watch as his victims endured horrifying torture. On April 12, 1984, Christopher, along with his hostages, saw a news report in which Tina's mother pleaded for her daughter's life. This triggered a panic attack in Christopher, something that had been happening more frequently in a frantic state. He left the motel with his captives. Later, in a forest, Christopher attempted to kill Dawnette. After enduring days of torture, Dawnette was so desperate that she begged him to kill her. Christopher stabbed her twice with a knife due to severe blood loss and the sedatives he had been administering. Dawnette lost consciousness, believing she was dead. Christopher abandoned her. Amazingly, Dawnette survived the nightmare. She regained consciousness, tried to make her way to the nearest road. Where a driver found her and helped her, Christopher returned to the spot where he had left Dawnette to confirm her death. But when he discovered she was no longer there, he panicked. Based on Dawnette's testimony, FBI agents determined that the suspect was heading toward the Canadian border. Investigators discovered he was driving a car stolen from Terry. The vehicle was soon found abandoned. Christopher managed to escape once again. He was next spotted at a shopping center in Victor, New York, where he targeted a 30-year-old woman named Beth Elaine Dodge to steal her Pontiac Firebird, again with Tina's assistance. Christopher took Beth to the woods and killed her. He did not abuse or torture Beth. He only wanted her car. After this cold-blooded murder, Christopher unexpectedly released Tina, even giving her money so she could return home. Tina became a crucial witness, providing detailed accounts of the horrors she endured during her captivity. FBI agents learned that Christopher had friends in Canada whom he had visited periodically before his crime spree. Law enforcement was convinced he was heading to them with his newly stolen car. Christopher had gained a significant lead over the agents. Authorities believed he was already en route to the border. In response, all available police forces were mobilized, and law enforcement agencies were alerted to the threat posed by Christopher. On April 13, Christopher stopped at a service station in Colebrook, New Hampshire, near the Canadian border. Two state police officers at the scene recognized him as a dangerous criminal from distributed bulletins. As the officers carefully observed him, Christopher noticed their presence. He ran to his car and armed himself with a weapon. One of the officers attempted to tackle him from behind, leading to a struggle in which his weapon discharged twice. The first bullet hit Christopher, penetrating his back, while the second caused a fatal chest injury. The officer accidentally attacked himself, despite suffering serious injuries. The officer survived, underwent a long recovery, and later returned to duty as a celebrated hero who had stopped a killer capable of taking more lives. During a search of Christopher's car, police discovered a copy of the book The Collector by John Fowles. The novel tells the story of a man who kidnaps and imprisons a woman in a basement, eventually leading to her death. Authorities believe Christopher was inspired by this book and saw it as a model for his crimes. The serial killer was later cremated in Florida, leaving behind an estate valued at over $7 million that same year. The court ordered taxes to be deducted from the estate, with the remaining funds distributed among the families of his victims. Several previous cases allegedly involving Christopher Wilder are also mentioned. On May 29, 1982, near a property owned by Christopher, a bag containing the skeletal remains of 17-year-old Tina Marie Beebe was discovered. Tina's sister revealed that before her disappearance, Tina had planned to attend a photo shoot after being invited by a photographer. Similarly, 20-year-old aspiring model Sherry Lynn Ball disappeared on June 27. 1983, in Boca Raton, Florida. After leaving for a photo shoot, her badly decomposed body was discovered 3 months later by a hunter in Shelby, New York. 18-year-old Tammy Lynn Leppert, an aspiring model, vanished in Florida following a heated argument with a man resembling Christopher Wilder, Tammy's mother, who had been actively supporting her modeling career, claimed that Christopher and Tammy had met during a film casting session. During this meeting, Christopher reportedly asked to photograph Tammy, but she refused. 15-year-old Colleen Emily Osborne went missing after leaving her home in Daytona Beach, Florida, on March 15, 1984. That day, she missed her school bus, skipped classes to go to the beach, and never returned home. On April 6, 1984, her partially buried body was found near a lake in Orange County, Florida. Investigators later uncovered that Christopher Wilder had stayed at a nearby motel on the same day as her disappearance. One of Colleen's classmates reported seeing a man resembling Christopher at their school. Scouting for models, the man had offered $100 to a girl willing to pose for him. But Colleen declined. Christopher Wilder is remembered as one of the most notorious serial killers in the United States. Infamously known by the nicknames the Beauty Queen Killer and the Snapshot Killer, the bodies of Rosario and Elizabeth were never recovered. It has been confirmed that he kidnapped 12 women and murdered 9 of them. Authorities also suspect his involvement in several other similar crimes in the United States and Australia during that period. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dana Laskowski. At approximately 11 a.m. on August 31, 2001, a couple from a small town near Seattle, Washington, called the police to request a welfare check on their nanny, Dana Laskowski, 36. She had never been late before, but that day, she did not show up. Although Dana had been caring for the couple's children for a long time and had always been reliable, the police then went to Dana's house at the address provided by the couple but found no one at the door. The officers then began searching the surrounding area and peering through the windows. A second officer checked the rooms through the windows until he reached the living room. It was dark and quiet inside, and he noticed a woman lying on the sofa under a blanket. At first, the officer thought she was just sleeping. However, he wondered why she did not respond to the repeated knocking. When he shined his flashlight into the room, he saw the woman in an unusual position. With one hand behind her back, she was still, indicating that something was seriously wrong. All the windows were locked and the blinds were drawn, so the scene could only be seen clearly from the inside. Fortunately for the police, the back door was open, suggesting that the criminal had entered and left through that door. The police entered Dana's home and discovered drops of blood on the floor, some of which appeared to be smeared, indicating that there had been an effort to wipe them away. Dana was dead, and there were no signs of abuse. Bruises were visible on her neck, elbows, and knees. An autopsy revealed multiple fractures. The medical examiner determined that Dana died from strangulation. The police believe that the perpetrator entered the home with the intention of killing her. Not by accident, they found a broken window in the basement, which they suspect was the killer's point of entry. While some valuables were missing from Dana's residence, it appeared that furniture and items had been thrown from drawers onto the floor. However, this looked more like a staged crime scene than a sign of a robbery. As the police walked through the kitchen, they noticed a knife rack that had been completely untouched. This could indicate that the attacker had carefully planned the crime in advance. Typically, victims would be struck in the face or head to disorient them, but there were no signs of such injuries on Dana. It appeared that Dana had been strangled instantly. Forensic experts understand that strangulation is not as simple as it appears. It is a lengthy process that requires considerable strength and endurance. An autopsy found only a single mark on Dana's neck, suggesting that her attacker had held her down when the police discovered that Dana was the mother of 9-year-old triplets. They were anxious to search her home for the children. Fortunately, they discovered that the children were not present at the time of the attack. The events that unfolded shocked the entire local community. Dana was known for her kindness and sensitivity, making her an unlikely victim of a violent crime. She avoided conflict and did not participate in illegal activities. The police compiled a list of suspects when they began investigating messages from the security service regarding Dana's acquaintances. To all who knew her, she was considered a creative and caring person. Dana's creativity stemmed from her father, a highly recognized artist, while her caring nature was inherited from her mother. This nurturing trait guided her life path. Growing up, she often babysat and was highly regarded by her neighbors for her skills. Dana aspired to open her own private kindergarten more than anything. She longed to be a mother, but this dream proved difficult to achieve. In 1989, when she was 24, she met a man named Sam. Romance quickly blossomed between the young couple, and they were married within months. Dana longed to start a family, but she faced infertility challenges. After 4 years of treatment, she learned she was pregnant with triplets, 2 boys and a girl. It was a moment she and her husband had long awaited. However, new challenges arose. Dana became famous when she shared her story with a local newspaper in 1992, discussing the difficulties she faced throughout her pregnancy. In her 5th month, she was hospitalized and told by doctors that she could give birth within 72 hours and that they might lose their baby girl. The couple cried all night over the news. Dana was then advised to rest completely at the clinic. Miraculously, she managed to carry the pregnancy to 8 months. This was a difficult period, but also a significant victory for her, something she often talked about later. In April 1993, she gave birth to triplets. The girl was the smallest, weighing just 1.5 kg, while the boys each weighed around 2 kg. The couple began to face new challenges when it came to raising children, which was not easy. However, Dana handled the situation very well. In 1996, she was interviewed as a local celebrity for having given birth to triplets. When asked about raising 3 children at once, she humorously recounted the moment when she was so exhausted that she went to the shops in her pajamas and slippers. Tragically, Dana, the proud mother of 3, was found strangled in her own living room. The police are investigating her surroundings to determine who might be responsible. It was revealed that in 2000, after 11 years of marriage, Dana chose to divorce Sam and raise the children on her own, along with her 3 children. Her 17-year-old niece, Amanda, who frequently ran away from home, and a friend named Emily Launborg also moved in with Dana after the tragedy. The police found very little evidence at the scene. They needed to interview all of Dana's relatives, starting with her ex-husband Sam. Initially, there were suspicions surrounding him. The police tried to inform him of the tragedy, but were unsuccessful. They also needed to check on the triplets, who were believed to be with Sam at the time. Sam did not answer calls for several days, raising serious concerns about his involvement. However, Sam eventually called the police back, explaining that he had gone camping with the children and was unaware of the situation. He said they had no cell service at their campsite, so they were unable to listen to any voice messages from family members upon returning from the trip. Sam and the children were shocked to discover multiple voice messages from the police, family, and friends, all relaying the tragic news of Dana's death and the urgent search for Sam and the children. At this point, Sam became the prime suspect in the case. The police suspected that he may have intentionally run away and kidnapped the children. The couple may have had ongoing disputes over child custody, alimony, and unresolved issues from their divorce, which could have provided him with a possible motive. The police discovered that Sam was unhappy with the court's custody ruling. He wanted to spend more time with the children, but his access was severely restricted. Additionally, Dana had moved away, making it difficult for him to visit and be with the children. Several witnesses noted that he was greatly affected by divorce, viewing her actions as an attempt to tear their family apart. However, he never acted cruelly or aggressively toward her or the children. The police quickly noticed that he was a tall man, indicating that he had the physical strength to handle Dana. Their suspicions grew as they spoke with him. He refused to provide fingerprints and a DNA sample, claiming that he did not want to be named as a suspect. Sam also mentioned that his DNA samples were at the Dana house because he frequently visited during meetings with the children. He had several cuts on his legs, which he said he received while playing baseball with his sons, a claim that was later verified. Sam insisted that he had been with his sons the entire time. 3 hours away from Dana's house, he even had a gas station receipt to back up his alibi. The triplets confirmed that they had been with their father the entire time and that he had not left to go on any long trips. While it was theoretically possible that Sam could have driven 3 hours to the house, committed the act, and returned while the children were asleep, this scenario seemed unlikely. A caring father would not have left his children alone in the woods for 6-7 hours, and the children repeatedly claimed that he had been with them the entire time. When the children woke up at night, he would have gently covered them with a blanket. It seemed improbable that they would have been forced to lie in such a situation, especially since their statements were completely consistent. As a result, Sam was quickly eliminated as a suspect. After these events, Sam's 3 children moved in with him. Now, it was necessary to investigate other potential suspects, but this proved challenging. Even Dana's niece, Amanda, who lived with her most of the time and probably knew her better than anyone else, had no idea who could have harmed her. Amanda described her aunt as her second mother and best friend. She stated that she was not home the night Dana was murdered and therefore did not know if Dana was expecting visitors. Dana was known to be quite sociable, often welcoming friends at all hours. She was so trusting that she often left her back door unlocked, allowing anyone to enter. Dana was also a very attractive woman, which could have attracted the attention of dangerous people. The police found the family's behavior quite alarming and contacted them to conduct a welfare check on Dana. It was clear that they knew something, which led the police to question them again. They were the ones who hired Dana as a nanny. When asked by the police about the situation, they shared that in Dana's neighborhood, there was a man named Patrick who was installing internet cable. He met Dana unexpectedly and, for a month, kept asking her out on dates. He left poems and notes on her back door, which she ignored. According to the family who hired Dana, she had no interest in Patrick. However, his letters became increasingly alarming and disturbing as he began to stalk her and detail her activities at specific times before her death. Dana even contacted a friend, urging her to ask the police to review her phone records if anything happened to her. She expressed that Patrick's constant phone calls frightened her. The police investigated this information and confirmed that an unknown phone number had called Dana multiple times on the night of her murder. They identified a white construction truck as being involved in the calls, and several witnesses reported seeing a similar vehicle behind Dana's home that evening. The police contacted Patrick's employer, who confirmed the witnesses' accounts. As a result, the police quickly obtained a search warrant for Patrick's home. From the start, Patrick was uncooperative and aggressive, which raised suspicions about him. He seemed reluctant to talk to the police. Initially, Patrick believed that the police were questioning him because Dana had filed a complaint against him. He admitted to stalking her and exhibiting obsessive behavior. However, when he was informed that the police were investigating Dana's murder, his demeanor changed completely. He became frightened, confused, and upset, and began to cooperate with the investigation. He provided his fingerprints and claimed that he had nothing to do with the murder. He also agreed to let the police search his home. Despite his previous objections, during the search, Patrick appeared to be very upset about Dana's death. During the investigation, the police found several letters addressed to a woman that were violent in nature. However, the details and descriptions of this woman did not match Dana. These letters were actually addressed to Patrick's ex-wife and reflected his unresolved anger toward her. Patrick recounted his activities on the night Dana was killed. He said he went to work and then attended a party with friends. Initially, the police doubted his story, but several witnesses confirmed his alibi, making him seem less likely to be the killer. The truck associated with Patrick was investigated and found to be unrelated to a vehicle seen near Dana's house. It belonged to another employee of the same organization. As a result, Patrick was removed from the suspect list. However, the police still had some doubts about him, as there was a possibility that witnesses might have been dishonest. The police then turned their attention to a third suspect, Dana's new boyfriend. Michael lived in Canada. It was revealed that Michael had a hot temper and was aggressive. Dana confided in a friend that if anything happened to her, the police should investigate Michael. They then decided to go to Canada to talk to him. Michael admitted that there were problems in their relationship on the night of the murder. He had a long phone conversation with Dana, during which she seemed unusually distant and cold. Even ignoring his words at the end of the conversation, this behavior made him extremely angry. Michael later planned to meet Dana in person to discuss their relationship, but he was unable to contact her, and he was not allowed to cross the border. His alibi was confirmed. He was still in another country and did not cross the border, which cleared him of all suspicions. The police soon focused on Dana's niece, Amanda, who left a note in the condolence book after Dana's funeral. In the note, she apologized to Dana for not being a better niece and stated that she was now sober. There was something about the way she wrote that suggested it was a message of remorse to Dana. It was clear that Dana cared deeply for her niece Amanda. She welcomed Amanda and her friends, often inviting them to her home, where Amanda would feed them and sometimes provide money or shelter when they needed it. The police then brought Amanda in for questioning. She mentioned a dangerous person in her group named Blaine, revealing that he had strangled her when she refused his advances. Amanda suspected that something similar might have happened to Dana. Amanda also recalled seeing Blaine with scratches on his arm after Dana's death. Blaine had a history of drug-related offenses. When the police tried to find him, they discovered that he was on probation and had fled the state, making him a wanted man. They eventually found him in Georgia, and the police requested his extradition. Unfortunately, it took time to resolve all the administrative issues, so the police decided to investigate the rest of the group. During this time, a member of their group ended up in jail. The police chose to speak to him directly. He seemed just as suspicious as Blaine, but quickly claimed that his gang was not responsible for Dana's death. He revealed that Emily Launborg, Amanda's best friend, was a frequent visitor to their home. Emily and Amanda were rebellious teenagers who often stayed with Dana. Initially, the police were skeptical of the information they received. They felt that Emily, a short, slender 17-year-old girl, might not have been strong enough to take on a grown woman. However, as they spoke to other members of the group, the investigation took a different direction. They learned from multiple sources that Emily was known for her incredible physical strength, which belied her appearance. Emily had a history of fighting and reckless behavior. Witnesses described an incident in which she overpowered a much larger adult man. Emily's actions were quite violent. She had tortured and killed animals. The teenagers provided the police with crucial information, revealing that Emily's preferred method of strangulation involved placing a person's hands behind their back. This technique closely resembled the position of Dana's body after her death, raising serious concerns for the police. Emily was then questioned by the police. She denied all charges, claiming that her friends had lied and tried to implicate her. However, she was unable to provide an alibi for the time of the murder. A search warrant was issued for Emily's room, where the police discovered some clothing belonging to Dana. It was revealed that Emily had worn one of these blouses to the funeral. Additionally, Emily's diary was found, containing disturbing entries. One entry expressed her desire to kill, indicating her wish to harm someone and escape without facing consequences. In her diary, she wrote that, after an argument with Amanda, she wanted to strangle her, according to Emily's parents. She left the house on the night of the murder, as she often did. Being a rebellious teenager, she announced that she was going to sleep over at a friend's house, which was typical of her behavior, so her parents didn't question her. With all the evidence the police had gathered being circumstantial, they decided to employ a specific tactic. They brought Amanda in for questioning and told her that they were aware of her lies. Without revealing any specifics, this approach proved effective. Amanda, Dana's niece, admitted to Emily's involvement. She revealed that both she and Emily had returned to Dana's house on the night of the murder while under the influence of drugs. They had used various substances throughout the night to the point where they could not recall which ones they had taken. The girls entered the house through an open back door and began rummaging through Dana's belongings in search of money. Dana noticed them and confronted them about their actions. When Dana asked them to leave, Emily became angry and insisted that she would not leave without the money. When Dana refused to give them cash, Emily became enraged and attacked her, strangling her. Amanda was so frightened that she turned away and closed her eyes to avoid witnessing anything. She did not see her friend confront her aunt, but she heard a crack, which she interpreted as a bone breaking, followed by a final gasp that signaled the end of the struggle. After the attack, Amanda and Emily grabbed the two cats and left. Emily attacked Dana, who had cared for her like a mother. In a sudden outburst of violent rage, Emily interpreted Dana's kindness as a sign of weakness and took advantage of it. She was not accustomed to rejection, which made her extremely angry. The police speculated that drugs may have played a role, but others believed that deeper issues were at play. Dana had objected to Emily's friendship with a dangerous person. Having noticed Emily's behavior deteriorating over time, the police did not have strong evidence against Emily. So, they focused on Amanda as their best chance for conviction. They offered Amanda a deal if she testified again before the grand jury. All charges against her would be dropped. Granting her immunity, Amanda accepted the deal. However, the prosecution's case in the Supreme Court remained weak. Emily was eventually offered a plea deal, which she accepted. Admitting her guilt, this allowed her to avoid a harsh sentence. Emily Launborg was later sentenced to 7 years in prison. Emily changed her name and got married. She had 2 children, but later divorced. She is no longer in contact with Amanda. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Barbara Kendhammer. Todd Kendhammer and Barbara met when they were both 16. Todd confessed it was love at first sight. They became close friends and eventually started dating in 1989. 2 years later, they got married and began their life together in Wisconsin. They soon welcomed their daughter, Jessica, followed by their son, Jordan. Jessica shared that her mother often called her father a wild rabbit because he was always full of energy and constantly coming up with new and crazy ideas. Barbara wholeheartedly supported Todd in everything he did. They had a loving relationship and rarely argued. Barbara worked at the middle school cafeteria, while Todd was employed at a factory producing aluminum cans. Together, they took on side projects, buying and selling houses, while Todd also did glass repair work, fixing broken windows and car windshields. The family lived a comfortable life. In 2016, Todd and Barbara celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, and that same year, they became grandparents for the first time when their older daughter had a baby. However, 2016 would mark a dramatic turning point in their lives. On the morning of September 16, 2016, Todd and Barbara woke up early and got ready for work. Todd was driving Barbara to her job at the school cafeteria. Later that day, they planned to meet their children for dinner at a restaurant. Their son, Jordan, who lived with them while attending college, remembered hearing the garage door open as his parents left. He mentioned there were no disagreements or anything unusual between them that morning. At 7:45 a.m., Todd and Barbara stopped briefly at a neighbor's house, as they were keeping an eye on the home while the neighbor was away. After a few minutes, they got back into the car, but instead of heading toward Barbara's workplace, they drove in the opposite direction while traveling down a rural road. Tragedy struck at 8:05 a.m. Todd made an urgent call to emergency services, reporting that he and Barbara had been involved in a severe car accident on a countryside road near La Crosse, Wisconsin. According to Todd, a metal pipe had smashed through the car's windshield, striking Barbara, who was in the passenger seat. She suffered serious injuries to her head and neck when the police arrived at the scene. Todd explained that at first, he thought he saw a bird. However, at the last moment, he realized it was actually a metal pipe. According to Todd, the pipe had fallen from a passing truck and struck Barbara directly. The pipe, which caused fatal injuries, was approximately 135 meters long and weighed about 10 kilograms. Barbara was unconscious, but still breathing, and was rushed to the hospital. Todd, panicked and trembling, was covered in his wife's blood and overwhelmed with distress over her condition. At the hospital, neurosurgeons informed Todd that Barbara's condition was critical and her chances of survival were very low. Less than 24 hours later, in the early hours of September 17, Barbara Kenhammer passed away without. Her family decided to donate her organs to help other patients in need. However, the tragedy didn't end there. Police began to suspect that Todd might have been responsible for his wife's death. Investigators observed abrasions on Todd's hands and knuckles, along with scratches on his neck. They found inconsistencies in Todd's version of events. Police searched for the truck Todd claimed the pipe had fallen from and interviewed locals to determine if anyone had seen such a vehicle that day. They also reviewed security footage from cameras near the accident site. One camera captured Todd's car driving along the road at approximately 7:57 a.m., but no truck matching Todd's description was seen traveling in the opposite direction during that time frame. 4 days after the incident, a medical examiner performed an autopsy on Barbara's body. The autopsy revealed 3 lacerations on the back of her head. It was determined that Barbara died from blunt force trauma to the head and neck, which caused skull fractures, a fracture of the cricoid cartilage, and fatal brain damage. The cricoid cartilage, located at the base of the neck, can be fractured during strangulation. Barbara also had multiple scratches on her neck, a broken nose, a laceration on her forehead, and bruises across her body. Photos taken by police at the scene showed abrasions on Todd's hands and scratches on his neck and chest. Todd explained these injuries by claiming he got them while working with glass, as he often repaired broken windshields. However, a local construction worker who passed by the Kenhammer's car around 8 a.m. reported seeing no damage to the windshield or anyone near the vehicle. The car was parked on the roadside but appeared empty. Police theorized that Barbara might have tried to escape from her husband and hidden in the tall grass, with Todd pursuing her. On the morning of the incident, Barbara was scheduled to be at work by 8 a.m., but she never called her co-workers to inform them of any delays. She also failed to call her mother, a daily routine she followed every morning before going to work. Todd told investigators that he planned to craft a windshield for Justin Heim, a former co-worker. He claimed that, while driving Barbara to work, he decided to stop by Justin's house to deliver the windshield. When questioned, Todd was asked by police if he had called Justin before going to his house. Todd admitted he hadn't called, explaining that he was confident Justin would be home. However, when investigators spoke to Justin, they received a completely different account. Justin stated that he had never ordered a windshield from Todd. Further investigation revealed that Todd didn't even know where Justin lived. About a week after Barbara's death, the police asked Todd to come to the station, claiming they had developed leads about the trucks the pipe might have fallen from that day. Todd went to the station, but appeared confused during questioning, frequently forgetting details. He explained that he was on sedatives, but hadn't taken them that day, which left him feeling overly anxious As the interrogation continued, investigators began to suspect Todd was lying. Additionally, the medical examiner concluded that Barbara's death could not have been caused by a pipe collision. When pressed further by police about his actual destination that day, Todd changed his story. He claimed he had been heading to another friend's house instead of Justin's. Police later located this friend, who also confirmed that he had never requested a windshield or discussed it with Todd. After 3.5 hours of questioning, Todd was released. However, 3 months after Barbara's death, Todd was arrested in December 2017. Todd went to trial for Barbara's death, with most attendees showing their support for him. His daughter, Jessica, was convinced her father couldn't be responsible for her mother's death, but worried that the court might impose a severe sentence. Forensic expert Dr. Kathleen McCubbin testified that Barbara died from head and neck trauma caused by a blunt object. Todd's lawyer questioned this. Pointing to a large travel mug found on the car's passenger side floor, he suggested that the mug might have struck Barbara's face as she ducked to avoid the pipe, potentially causing her injuries. The condition of the car's windshield also became a key focus of the trial. Alongside the medical evidence, defense expert Mark Meshulam, who had over 30 years of experience in glass-related cases, supported Todd's account. He testified that the windshield exhibited 3 points of impact: one from Todd's fist hitting the glass, another from the pipe entering the windshield, and a third from Todd pulling the pipe out. However, police forensic experts disagreed, concluding that the windshield only displayed 2 external impacts, ruling out the possibility of the pipe hitting it twice. Jessica and Jordan strongly defended their father during the trial. They couldn't believe he would kill their mother and then call the police just 5 minutes later. Jordan argued that, had their father intended to harm Barbara, he wouldn't have staged a complicated pipe incident on a busy road, especially since he owned around 28 weapons stored in the basement on the witness stand. Todd insisted he had never physically harmed Barbara. He explained that he panicked during police questioning and gave inconsistent statements. He said, "When I watch the video, I see myself in it. But the person speaking doesn't feel like me. I wasn't in the right state of mind. I wasn't thinking about my actions or where I was going. My mind was only focused on Barbara." Todd Kendhammer was convicted of first-degree murder on December 15, 2017. During this hearing, Jessica and Jordan were stunned when Barbara's cousin spoke in court against Todd. The cousin read a letter signed by other family members, expressing their collective desire to protect Barbara and urging the court to impose the harshest punishment on Todd. Jessica disclosed that her mother and this cousin had a strained relationship and had stopped speaking to each other before her mother's death. Following the trial, Todd was forced to sell the house he and Barbara had lived in to cover legal expenses. In the end, the judge ruled that Todd was sentenced to life in prison and is eligible for parole after 30 years. Despite the initial ruling, Jessica and Jordan refused to give up and were determined to clear their father. In August 2021, 4 years after his conviction, Todd returned to court once again. He insisted on his innocence, claiming that Barbara's death was caused by a pipe accident. While the prosecution maintained that he had murdered her, Todd's attorney introduced a pathologist with experience in nearly 6 autopsies. After reviewing Barbara's medical records and photographs, doctor found no evidence of a struggle. Contradicting the original forensic expert's conclusions, she theorized that Barbara's cricoid cartilage injuries might have been caused by a blow from a large travel mug resting on her lap during the car ride. Regarding the wounds on the back of Barbara's head, doctors suggested that Barbara may have instinctively ducked in fear, causing the pipe to strike her. She concluded that Barbara's death was the result of a car accident. The defense also called forensic pathologist Dr. Kathleen. She described the case as complex and acknowledged that the original autopsy had been well executed, with reasonable conclusions. However, she explained that she would not have reached the same conclusions, agreeing with another pathologist for the defense. Dr. Kathleen stated that she did not believe Barbara was strangled. She added that in her extensive experience, she had never encountered a fractured cricoid cartilage in any strangulation case. To better understand what happened in the fatal incident, local authorities recreated Todd's account by conducting an experiment. They dropped a similar pipe from a truck bed to see if it could hit a car's windshield. Initially, Todd's attorneys dismissed the test as inconclusive, and the video of the experiment, conducted in 2017, was not introduced until 2021. The experiment showed that if a pipe bounced a certain way, as Todd described, it could hit the windshield in one of 4 attempts. The pipe hit the ground and bounced high enough to reach the windshield. Lending credibility to Todd's version of events, the attorneys also presented additional videos of similar accidents to demonstrate that Todd's case was not unusual. Although these other incidents did not involve fatalities, the vehicles were damaged by pipes in comparable ways. Ultimately, the jury was convinced that the testimony regarding strangulation was the most credible, despite the defense's efforts to offer another explanation. In May 2022, the judge denied Todd Kenthammer's request for a new trial, but Todd intends to appeal the decision. Todd's daughter, Jessica, shared, "I used to get annoyed when Dad would constantly call me or invite himself over, but now I miss that so much. I miss my parents all the time." Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Lana Clayton. Today, we will discuss a common household medication, eye drops. What a surprise. They have indeed been used as a weapon for murder. Let's begin with the story of Stephen Clayton, a kind-hearted and romantic man who believed in true love. He found great success on his own and was passionate about helping others achieve their goals. Born in South Carolina in 1954, Stephen was a highly motivated individual. By the age of 30, he had established a successful physical therapy business focused on sports injury treatment and rehabilitation. For many years, Stephen lived his dream and achieved remarkable success, earning millions by 1995 and running a large company. After selling his business, he chose to enjoy life and dedicated his free time to teaching and mentoring young entrepreneurs, helping them realize their dreams. Throughout his life, Stephen positively influenced many people, and those he helped felt fortunate to have known him. Stephen was a firm believer in true love and made several attempts to find his soulmate. Despite his past relationships not working out, he remained hopeful of finding the one. His last marriage was to Lana Clayton in 2010. Stephen, who had moved to North Carolina, met Lana online. She was 10 years younger than he was. He quickly became infatuated with her. They got married in November 2013, when Stephen was nearly 60 years old, and Lana, his 7th or 8th wife, after 2 years of marriage. They moved into a luxurious mansion on the shores of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. Designed to resemble George Washington's estate, it was a beautiful, idyllic location surrounded by nature. Stephen had sufficient funds to support this lifestyle even after many years of retirement. Meanwhile, Lana continued to work as a medical professional with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, caring for veterans in various hospitals. Her kindness and compassion deepened Stephen's love for her. She was exactly who he wanted by his side for several years. Stephen's family felt very close to Lana, believing that she and Stephen brought each other happiness. With no apparent signs of trouble in their relationship, little is known about what happened later in Stephen and Lana's marriage. But by 2018, Stephen had passed away on July 21. Around 1 p.m., Lana dashed out of their house into the street, stopping a passing motorcyclist in a panic. She told him her husband needed help and urged him to call 911. The man called emergency services and then saw Lana running to a neighbor's house in search of more help, while the man was speaking with the dispatcher, trying to get help to the scene. He noticed that Lana received a text message on her phone. She appeared visibly angry and did not attempt to hide her emotions. Meanwhile, the neighbor went inside the house to check on Stephen, while Lana stayed outside. It seemed that something traumatic had occurred inside. The ambulance finally arrived, and when they entered the house, they saw that Stephen was lying at the bottom of the main staircase under a white sheet, and sadly, it was too late to save him. The paramedics confirmed that Stephen had died, and everything Lana mentioned about her husband's health, along with his appearance, suggested that his death was accidental. She explained that Stephen had been feeling very dizzy and had been sick for the past few days, unable to get out of bed that morning, although Stephen still felt unwell. When she checked on him around 11 a.m., he was alive and seemed fine later. Lana decided to go outside and mow the lawn, which took her about 2 hours due to its large size. When she returned to the house, she found Stephen lying at the foot of the stairs. Stephen had not been in good health, and given his age, this could explain his death. Looking back, several years earlier, Stephen had gone to the Bahamas to go diving. He ignored several basic safety rules, which led to him becoming severely ill. He changed from very low pressure to very high pressure too quickly, without allowing his body time to adjust, which is crucial. When diving at different depths, Stephen did not take precautions, which led to long-term complications from decompression sickness. He required several months of rehabilitation and was never able to fully recover, despite all attempts to help him. He continued to experience health issues when the police officers spoke with Lana afterward. They quickly concluded that it was a terrible accident, given Stephen's age and previous health problems. They also considered the possibility of a heart attack. However, not everyone at the scene shared this view. Nick French, one of Stephen's nephews and a police officer from a nearby county, rushed to his uncle's home as soon as he heard the news. He noticed details that others overlooked. For instance, Lana had 2 phones in the house and was a nurse. Why didn't she call 911 herself? Instead, she chose to run into the street to ask a stranger to call for an ambulance, and then went to a neighbor's house for help. When people are under stress, they can sometimes lose their ability to think logically, and this can happen even to those who are well trained. Additionally, Stephen's nephew noticed that the stair runner was not secured in any way. It was completely untouched. If someone, especially someone as tall as Stephen, had fallen down the stairs, the runner would have shifted, but it remained in place. There were also several odd aspects of Lana's behavior that caught Nick's attention right away. She never mentioned that, as a trained nurse, she attempted to revive her husband. The medical examiner said they would take Stephen's body and conduct several tests to determine the exact cause of death and reassure his wife, but Lana was not interested in understanding what had happened to her husband. Her primary concern was to get him to the morgue quickly. Everything about the situation seemed suspicious when someone brought up the investigation into the cause of Stephen's death. Lana appeared very uncomfortable. She started discussing how Stephen had a history of using banned substances and expressed her reluctance to perform an autopsy, fearing it would damage his reputation. However, she quickly added that he wasn't a heavy user. He smoked a little weed and maybe tried some other things occasionally. As she spoke, Lana's demeanor grew increasingly suspicious, especially when Nick suggested contacting Stephen's other nephew, Chris Fagan. Lana strongly opposed this idea, claiming she didn't want Chris to see his uncle in such a condition, believing it would be too difficult for him. However, Chris was an adult and deserved to be informed about what had happened. Nick tried 3 times to persuade Lana to tell Chris, but each time she refused. Ultimately, Nick decided that Chris needed to be informed, and so he would call Chris anyway, while an upset Lana sat on the couch speaking with police officers. Nick went upstairs to make a private call. First, he noticed that Stephen's mobile phone was missing, which was unusual since Stephen always carried it with him. He thought the phone should be lying next to Stephen's bed, on the dresser, or on the bed, but it was nowhere to be seen. Another strange thing Nick noticed was the condition of the room. Although Lana had mentioned that Stephen had been sick in bed for several days, he expected to see a typical mess: tissues, cups, and medicine packaging scattered about, along with the smell of illness. Instead, he was confronted with something entirely different. The bed was completely soaked with urine, indicating that Stephen had been left in deplorable conditions. This was alarming to Nick, especially since Lana, a nurse experienced in caring for veterans, should have ensured her husband was looked after, even if she wasn't sleeping in the same room as him. She could have at least changed the sheets. Investigators believe that Lana intentionally discarded Stephen's phone while he was in bed, preventing him from calling for help. They also think she may have taken his phone several days before his death, since his sister was unable to reach him, which was unusual for him. Chris, Stephen's nephew, whom Lana had wanted to avoid contacting, was eventually informed about the situation. He decided to visit her to see how she was doing and to discuss matters in person. And upon his arrival, he brought up the topic of the will as the heir to Stephen's estate. Chris wanted to locate the will so he could handle his uncle's affairs. However, Lana claimed that Stephen had not created a will. Chris knew this couldn't be true because he had seen the will before. Furthermore, it was hard to believe that Stephen, who was wealthy, intelligent, and 64 years old with health issues, would not have prepared one. The main surprise came when the Clayton family learned that Lana had destroyed Stephen's will. She had started a small fire and burned a stack of legal documents. Lana believed that by doing this, as Stephen's wife, she would automatically inherit his entire estate under South Carolina law, but her actions went further. 2 weeks after Stephen's passing, during his wake, family and friends noticed that Lana had already collected all of his belongings and was trying to give them away at his funeral. She offered his items to relatives, stating that anything they didn't take would be given to outsiders. This behavior raised eyebrows and didn't match what one would expect from a grieving widow. Stephen's nephews were determined not to let their doubts about Lana be ignored. They discreetly contacted the morgue, requested an autopsy and toxicology tests on behalf of the family. All without informing Lana, the forensic toxicologist and medical examiner conducted tests that revealed the true cause of Stephen's death. They discovered that Stephen Clayton had an extremely high level of a chemical commonly found in some eye drops, particularly those used to treat redness. This chemical is designed to constrict blood vessels in the eyes when applied, but when ingested in large amounts, it can depress the central nervous system, cause rapid heart rate, and even result in death. Since this substance is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, it can be consumed unknowingly, making it very dangerous. Even at lower doses, it can cause unpleasant side effects like vomiting and diarrhea, while higher doses can lead to life-threatening situations. With this new information in mind, investigators needed to determine whether Stephen had ingested the eye drops. Therefore, on August 29, 2018, Lana was called in for questioning under the pretext of clarifying some details. At that time, she thought she had avoided suspicion. In reality, the detectives wanted to share their findings and observe her reaction, although Lana was aware that an autopsy had been performed without her knowledge. She was unaware that FBI agents and personnel from the York County Sheriff's Office were in the next room, listening to her. During the interrogation, Lana initially acted like a grieving widow who had no idea what had happened to her husband, however. When the detectives began discussing the eye drops, she quickly realized their significance, and her behavior shifted dramatically. She seemed to know about the substance and started to weave a complicated story about Stephen. She claimed that her husband had discovered that adding a few drops of the medication to his morning coffee could act as a laxative, which he had been doing due to his bowel issues. This was her explanation for why the substance was found in Stephen's body. There were many other products available that could address this issue. Lana herself was a nurse, and the detectives couldn't understand why Stephen had been doing this for some time. However, Lana soon sensed that they doubted her initial account. So she changed her story. She suddenly began to assert that Stephen had abused her for years. She attempted to persuade the detectives that her husband was a terrible and cruel person who had used illegal substances. The detectives quickly recognized that her claims were false, as they had already reviewed the toxicology report. If Stephen had been using banned substances regularly, it would have been evident in the report. They also looked into her accusations of his cruelty and found no evidence to support them. Ultimately, Lana began to realize she was in a precarious situation. The interrogation concluded with her returning home. Unaware that the investigators were closely monitoring her, apparently, she thought a lot while driving home, because when Lana got home, she sat down with the detectives and told them almost everything. Lana disclosed that after enduring years of abuse from her husband, she finally reached a breaking point. She admitted to pouring an entire bottle of eye drops into his water, claiming she did not intend to kill him, but wanted him to suffer. Her goal was to make him ill for a day or two, so he wouldn't bother her, giving her a chance to escape his constant demands. In a shocking twist, Lana also confessed that 2 years prior to Stephen's death, she had called 911. Claiming she accidentally shot him in the back of the head with a crossbow, she explained that she was just loading the crossbow for protection and accidentally shot him while he was sleeping. Surprisingly, the police believed her story of an accident, and Stephen likely supported her claim, thinking his wife would never intentionally harm him. However, on August 29, 2018, Lana confessed that Stephen's death was not an accident and that she had intentionally killed him to stop him from abusing her. The investigators still believed there was more to the story. The circumstances of the crime scene in Stephen's bedroom led detectives to a specific conclusion. It was evident that Lana had been gradually poisoning him over several days to determine how long it would take to kill him. Specifically, while he spent 3 days in bed feeling dizzy, she was experimenting with the right dosage of poison, and on the 3rd day, she succeeded. Additionally, regarding Stephen's missing mobile phone, detectives suspected that Lana had thrown it into Lake Wylie to prevent him from calling for help when he was unable to move in bed. York County Police arrested Lana Clayton after a thorough investigation based on her confession, which took several days to evaluate. During this time, Lana attempted to harm herself by taking pills and turning on the gas in her home. Fortunately, a neighbor checked on her and discovered the situation. She was quickly taken to the hospital and survived. A few days later, she was officially arrested and charged with murder. once it became clear that Lana had killed Stephen. His family began to reflect on the past few years of his marriage. Questioning whether Lana had been planning the murder for a long time, they speculated that their move to South Carolina was deliberate. Considering that state law stipulates a spouse inherits everything if their partner dies without a will, they also remembered that Stephen had experienced unexplained health issues intermittently over several months, and even the best doctors could not help him. On January 17, 2020, Lana pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drugs. She maintains that she did not intend to kill her husband. The prosecutor described the case as one of the worst in York County's history, according to the prosecution. Lana administered eye drops to Stephen over several days at their home on Lake Wylie and ignored him as he was dying, even throwing his phone into the lake to prevent him from calling for help. Authorities suggest her motive was financial, and she even burned a will. Lana's lawyer argued that she had been a victim of lifelong abuse and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which developed during her marriage to Stephen after a jury deliberated. Lana was sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole. This was a well-thought-out and successfully executed plan on Lana's part. Stephen's relatives confronted the deception of the evil murderer, whom they believed to be not only a good person, but also their friend. Lana deceived not only Stephen, but also his family and friends. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Mike and Missy McIvor. During a tropical storm in the Florida Keys, Missy McIvor and Mike were murdered in their home. Missy was 9 months pregnant at the time, which made the case especially heartbreaking, not only for the police investigating, but also for the entire state of Florida today. We explore this shocking murder. Susan Michelle Emil, also known as Missy, was born on July 24, 1962, in Titusville, Pennsylvania. From a young age, she had the ability to draw others in. She had a warm smile, a caring nature, and a kind heart. Missy had a deep love for children, which she pursued by becoming an elementary school teacher, a dream she cherished and worked hard to achieve. Mike McIvor was born on April 15, 1961, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His parents had a deep passion for airplanes, a relatively new invention at the time. His mother worked as a flight attendant, while his father was an airline captain for Mike's family. Airplanes were not only a source of income, but also a shared love. Many childhood photos show Mike disassembling and reassembling planes with his family. Mike pursued his passion from childhood all the way to his career and eventually became a professional pilot. In 1987, he met a girl named Missy, and he fell in love with her immediately. They first laid eyes on each other at a nightclub and talked non-stop all night. They felt like they were destined to be together. So they decided to start a serious relationship. 2 years later, Mike and Missy moved to Key Largo, where they bought a spacious house in May 1990. They got married in a small ceremony in their backyard. Everyone who witnessed their marriage agreed that they were a perfect couple. Mike was healthy and successful, while Missy was beautiful, caring, and kind. They were both good people and had the potential to be wonderful parents. In January 1991, Missy found out she was pregnant. They began converting the living room into a nursery and were excited to plan every detail for their first child. The tropical storm hit the area in late August, bringing heavy rains and strong winds. Mike and Missy attended Lamaze classes together. They had chosen a name for their child and were looking forward to Missy giving birth naturally as soon as class ended. The sky darkened with ominous clouds, and lightning flashed in the distance. That Lamaze class would be the last time anyone saw Missy and Mike alive. The storm hit on the night of August 21st, and after it passed, everyone returned to their normal routines. Children began arriving at Key Largo Elementary School. and teachers discussed the terrible storm that had just occurred. However, Missy did not show up for work that day whenever she took a day off. She always called ahead to avoid worrying her students. Demonstrating her dedication to her job, Missy's absence was not only unusual, but also alarming. Worried, her colleagues called Missy's home, but no one answered. They continued to call Mike's sister, Sharon, to inquire about the situation after hearing the news. But Sharon called Missy's home, but no one answered her either. She tried again, but still, no one picked up. Strangely, even Mike and Missy's answering machine was not working. Sharon informed Missy's colleagues that she was unable to contact her, prompting them to visit Missy and Mike's home. The door was locked, and all the curtains were drawn except for one, which was only partially open, allowing the colleagues to catch a glimpse of the living room. They were shocked to find a person lying motionless on the floor. With only the person's feet visible, her colleagues felt worried. After witnessing such a disturbing scene through the window, Missy's neighbor then noticed something unusual and decided to check it out. When Missy's colleagues informed him about the situation inside the house, feeling that something was wrong, the neighbor decided to break down the door. When they entered the house, they found Mike lying on his back on the floor, his arms and legs spread out. His head was wrapped in tape. His mouth was also covered with tape, and white socks were placed in front of him. Shocked, they quickly called the police to report the incident. The police arrived promptly to investigate the scene. While searching the house, they found a shoe print on Mike's throat and a metal bar in the kitchen. The police believe the metal bar was the murder weapon and that the killer may have stomped on Mike's throat before killing him in the master bedroom. Missy's body was found. Her wrists were tied to her ankles with what appeared to be a clothesline, and a tie was wrapped tightly around her neck. 2 pieces of tape covered her eyes. Missy had been abused while she was pregnant and then strangled to death. In the following months, the townspeople began installing alarm systems and purchasing weapons, worried that they might be the next victims. Meanwhile, the police were trying to determine what had happened. They believed that the killer had cut the phone lines and entered Missy's house using a ladder left by a contractor. The timing of the attack during a storm allowed him to enter and exit the house undetected. Interestingly, the killer only had a metal bar with him and used items found in the house to tie up his victims, suggesting that he was experienced. DNA was collected from the crime scene, including semen samples found on various parts of Missy's body. The results of the autopsy confirmed that both Mike and Missy died from strangulation. Mike suffered injuries from being struck with the metal bar, but he also had severe bruising on his abdomen, indicating that he had been kicked in the stomach. Additionally, his throat was severely damaged from being trampled. The strangulation marks on Missy's neck indicated that she had fought back for some time, forcing the killer to attempt multiple strangulation maneuvers before ultimately killing her. Tragically, her child, Kyle, died from a lack of oxygen in the womb during the attack. Police believe that Missy was the primary target and that the perpetrator may have known Mike. As a result, the police began questioning people she knew. Police eliminated 3 potential suspects after they volunteered to provide DNA samples. The police then noticed that some of Mike's business dealings did not appear to be entirely transparent. They discovered that Mike had made several trips to a notorious drug manufacturing center during the height of Miami's illegal drug trade. The police investigated Mike's business dealings, but ultimately, this investigation went nowhere. As there was no evidence that Mike was involved in any illegal activity, time passed without much progress. Then, unexpectedly, there was a breakthrough in the case. Renowned FBI psychologist Dale Hinman was brought in and used the available evidence to create a detailed psychological profile of the killer. She suggested that the killer may have a criminal record, that he knew at least some aspects of Missy's habits, and that he may have been obsessed with her. This was a major turning point in the investigation. A police officer has been trying to catch a suspect named Thomas Overton for years. Thomas is believed to be responsible for the attack and murder of a 20-year-old girl. The girl was last seen at a movie theater where Thomas worked. and her body was later discovered wrapped in a tarp with popcorn kernels nearby. Although the police suspect Thomas, there is no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Thomas later became the prime suspect in the murders of Missy and Mike. However, there is still no direct evidence linking him to their murders. On October 6, 1996, Thomas was arrested while committing an armed robbery and was imprisoned for this crime. He later injured himself in a failed escape attempt while being transported to prison. He asked the paramedics to provide him with gauze. The police collected DNA from the swab and compared it to evidence found at Missy's home, confirming his involvement in the crime. Shortly thereafter, Mike confessed to the murder. He had previously worked at a gas station that Missy often visited, and he had attempted to flirt with her, which she found offensive. She confided in others about the encounter, especially since she was 8 months pregnant at the time, the night before her death. Missy told Mike's sister, Sharon, that Mike had approached her again. This time, more aggressively, she had no idea that Mike had seen her address on a check she had written and had been stalking her for days. Thomas regularly visited Missy's home to spy on her. Revealing his disturbing obsession with her, he noticed contractors coming in to build a nursery for Missy's family on August 21st. During a storm, Thomas put on a mask, black military fatigues, and gloves, and went to Missy's house. He climbed a ladder to the nursery, opened the glass door, and quietly entered. At that time, Mike was in the kitchen and was probably unaware that Thomas was coming up behind him. Suddenly, Thomas hit Mike on the head with a metal bar, causing Mike to instinctively fight back. A struggle broke out, but Thomas eventually overpowered Mike and strangled him to death during this attack. Missy entered the room, saw what was happening, screamed, and ran to her bedroom. Thomas followed her, and in his confession, he claimed that she begged for her life and tried to tell him that she was pregnant. However, her words had no effect on him. He then killed Missy and abused her. The trial of Thomas Overton began on October 17, 1998. Prosecutors presented new evidence, including photos of Missy's pregnant belly that Thomas took after she was killed. During the trial, Thomas smiled and gestured towards Mike and Missy's family. Throughout the proceedings, he remained cold and cruel, seemingly enjoying the attention and considering himself a victor. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, on March 18, 1999, Thomas Overton was sentenced to death for the murders of Mike and Missy McIver. He is currently on death row and has shown no remorse for his actions. Mike's parents died shortly after his death. Unable to cope with the loss, Mike's sister, Sharon, described Thomas as the embodiment of evil. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Vaughn family. The Vaughn family, a family of 5 that everyone believed had a perfect life, lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs. To outsiders, they seemed like a happy and close-knit family. However, beneath this facade, their seemingly perfect life was about to take a dark and tragic turn that would shake everything to its foundation. Kimberly was born in Morris, Illinois, in 1972. Into a well-off family, she has a twin sister named Jennifer. Her family valued education and personal growth, so she attended a prestigious school, participated in sports, and was known for her friendly and sociable demeanor. Christopher Vaughn was born in St. Louis, Missouri, in 1974, and grew up in a modest, close-knit family with 2 brothers. As a child, he enjoyed soccer, hiking, camping, and spending time outdoors with his family. Kimberly and Christopher met in the early 1990s and quickly fell in love. However, Kimberly's parents were not supportive of their relationship due to concerns about Christopher's age, his lack of a stable job, and his less affluent background. Despite this disapproval, Kimberly and Christopher were determined to be together. In the summer of 1994, after Kimberly discovered she was pregnant, they got married. Despite their youth, they were eager to start a family. Their first child, Abigail, was born just 4 months after their wedding. A year later, they welcomed their second daughter, Cassandra, and 3 years after that, their son Blake completed their family. In the early years of their marriage, Kimberly and Christopher enjoyed a loving and joyful life together. Their children were talented and creative, excelling in both sports and music. Kimberly dedicated herself to being a homemaker, actively participating in her children's activities. Meanwhile, Christopher was growing a small cybersecurity business. After a few years, the family relocated to Washington and eventually settled in a quiet town in Illinois, where they bought a spacious home. Their beautifully decorated house even earned them a feature in a local newspaper. Eager for a new challenge, Kimberly decided to pursue a law degree. She enrolled in a local university and earned her degree just a month before tragedy struck from the outside. Their family appeared to embody the American dream. However, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Christopher's job frequently required him to travel, during which he began an affair with a woman. This affair lasted about a year before Kimberly discovered it, shaking their marriage to its foundation. Despite Christopher's betrayal, they chose to stay together for the sake of their children. But the strain on their relationship only grew. Kimberly couldn't shake her suspicion that Christopher was still unfaithful, and ultimately, her instincts were correct. Along with the emotional strain, Kimberly's health began to deteriorate. She struggled with severe anxiety, frequent migraines, insomnia, and even high blood pressure. Faced with these challenges, she decided to see a doctor. The medication prescribed to her became a regular part of her daily routine, and for about a year, she worked hard to manage her symptoms. In addition, Kimberly attended therapy sessions with a psychologist, where she discussed the increasing problems in her marriage. Despite this, she is still sociable, friendly, and energetic. In contrast, Christopher was seen by friends and family as a reserved introvert who rarely expressed his emotions. In June 2007, just before their 13th wedding anniversary, the couple planned a family trip to an amusement park in Springfield, Illinois. Christopher chose the destination, and the rest of the family agreed. Early in the morning, on June 14th, the Vaughn family set off in their SUV. A few hours later, a passing motorist found Christopher limping away along the highway. Covered in blood, he had a wound on his leg and calmly claimed that his wife had attacked him. However, his story became puzzling when he admitted he couldn't remember anything else, attributing it to a sudden loss of memory. According to Christopher, they were on their way to the amusement park when Kimberly began to feel carsick and asked him to stop. He pulled over and got out to check the roof rack. While he was outside, he heard an explosion, and everything went dark. When he regained consciousness, he found blood running down his leg and, in shock, ran away. Unsure of what had happened to his wife and children, a passerby picked him up, but he couldn't remember where they had parked the SUV. When police later found the vehicle, they discovered a tragic scene. Kimberly and her 3 children had all been killed. From that moment, private investigator Bill Clutter stated that Christopher Vaughn became the main suspect, accused of murdering his family and staging it to look like a murder. Take his own life. Kimberly had been attacked once in the head, and each child had been attacked twice. A witness claimed that Christopher said his wife had pulled the trigger, but his memory seemed to fail him. When he reached the hospital, he reportedly told a nurse that, "You should call my wife. She gets mad when I don't call her." After getting treatment, Christopher was taken to the police station, where he was interrogated for nearly 14 hours. He returned for additional questioning on June 14th, 15th, and 17th. During these extensive interviews, he mentioned that Kimberly had asked him to pull over because she was feeling nauseous. He explained that he stopped his car near a cell phone tower to check the back tires. After securing the strap on the topper, he got back into the car and noticed his leg was bleeding. He insisted he had no memory of anyone attack him or his family. When detectives suggested that Kimberly might have attacked him, Christopher quickly defended her, insisting that she would never hurt the children. He maintained that he only found out he had been attacked when a doctor informed him at the hospital. He appeared genuinely confused, insisting that nobody else was present and that Kimberly didn't have a gun, so he couldn't understand how the attack had occurred. As the interrogation progressed, the detectives told Christopher that his family was alive and asked him to explain what had occurred at that moment. Christopher requested to speak with Kimberly directly. Throughout the questioning, he consistently denied any involvement in the attack, claiming he had no recollection of the events. However, he soon altered his story, stating that it was Kimberly who attacked him. This inconsistency only added to the confusion and made it difficult to trust his account of the tragic situation. Initially, many people supported Christopher, believing he could not be responsible for such a dreadful act and speculating that someone else might be involved. However, the police, who had witnessed the crime scene, were convinced that the murders were domestic and ruled out the possibility of other suspects. During subsequent interrogations, Christopher was unable to provide any new information, remained adamant about his story. He claimed that Kimberly might have killed their children, injured him, and then taken her own life. He even considered himself fortunate that the bullet had only grazed the soft tissue of his thigh. Avoiding any major blood vessels, he suggested that Kimberly's behavior was influenced by the medication she was taking and the strain in their relationship due to his infidelity. Christopher stated that his memory loss stemmed from shock, which also explained why he hadn't immediately alerted the authorities or emergency services from the outset. Investigators had been skeptical of Christopher's account. There was insufficient evidence to arrest Christopher at that time. The police continued their investigation, seizing Kimberly and Christopher's laptops and searching the family home. During the initial investigation, Christopher was not detained and even organized the funeral for his wife and children. The funeral took place on June 23rd at a local funeral home, where many people attended. Several guests noticed the palpable tension between the Vaughn and Phillips families. Just before the service was set to start, police arrived and arrested Christopher on charges of murdering his family. He remained calm and did not resist the officers. However, his parents were outraged, claiming that their son was not allowed to say goodbye to his family, although Christopher's guilt had not been established. Extensive media coverage led the Vaughn family to suspect that his arrest during the funeral was an attempt to attract more public attention. In contrast, the Phillips family viewed the arrest positively. Kimberly's mother, Susan Phillips, expressed relief, stating she was glad her daughter was no longer considered a suspect in the deaths of her children. When the investigation progressed, the investigators was discovered that Christopher had taken out a life insurance policy on Kimberly, which would pay him $1 million if she died. The more the police investigated, the more they believed Christopher was the main suspect in this tragic event. The investigation lasted over 5 years, during which Christopher remained in custody despite his constant claims of innocence. He faced serious charges that could have led to the death penalty if he had been convicted. He was assigned attorneys through a special program that provides legal defense for those facing capital punishment. Christopher's defense team worked diligently to shift the blame to his late wife, Kimberly. They presented evidence that she had various mental health issues, which were exacerbated by the marital problems stemming from Christopher's infidelity and her subsequent health challenges. They argued that the medication she was prescribed only worsened her condition, ultimately leading to her tragic actions. The situation may not be as unlikely as it seems, especially when considering the viewpoint of Robert Deal, a crime scene investigator involved in the case. Robert has publicly supported Christopher, arguing that the bullet trajectory and other forensic evidence actually indicate that Kimberly was the attacker. He believes that investigators were overly focused on one theory and ignored other possibilities whenever Robert proposed ideas that contradicted the official narrative. He felt dismissed. He claims that the police insisted Christopher was a criminal mastermind who could outsmart everyone, including the experts. According to Robert, investigators often altered their theories to fit the evidence instead of allowing the evidence to lead them to the truth. The defense team highlighted that some crucial elements of the state's forensic case did not withstand scrutiny. For example, the state contended that Christopher unbuckled his wife's seatbelt after attacking her, claiming that a large blood stain near the latch came from Kimberly's injury. However, DNA tests later showed that the blood actually belonged to Christopher. This evidence significantly undermined the state's theory. The defense presented additional evidence regarding Kimberly's situation. They pointed out that at the time of her death, she was taking medications, including nortriptyline and Topamax, to manage her migraine headaches just 2 weeks before her death. Kimberly had emailed Christopher, expressing that she had experienced a noticeable change in her personality and an increase in anxiety. Furthermore, her nortriptyline levels were found to be at the low end of the toxic range, suggesting that the medication could have negatively impacted her mood and behavior. The defense argued that these drugs might have caused her to act in ways that were uncharacteristic, possibly even leading to thoughts of self-harm or violence. The defense proposed that Christopher might have experienced dissociative amnesia, a condition that can occur after a traumatic event, which could explain his lack of memory regarding the tragic incidents. Dr. Todd Grande, a counselor specializing in personality disorders, addiction, trauma recovery, and assessments, noted that such cases are not uncommon. He explained that individuals can indeed lose their memory after a specific traumatic event. Like an accident, Dr. Grande remarked, "I've seen this many times. I have no doubt that it's a real condition," and citing instances following severe motor vehicle accidents. At this point, things were starting to look more promising for Christopher's case. However, just as hope was building, a significant change occurred. The state enacted new laws abolishing the death penalty. This change meant that Christopher lost the legal team funded by the Capital Defense Program. His defense team requested $250 to continue their work, but Christopher could not afford this amount. Consequently, he was assigned a public defender, and they had to begin his defense. From the ground up, Christopher's new defense team struggled to build a convincing case, especially after investigators examined his personal laptop, which had been taken during a search of his home. They discovered a large number of messages exchanged between Christopher and a Canadian man. The two had connected about 10 months before the incident on a social networking site and had maintained regular communication. Christopher confided in him about his dissatisfaction with his marriage, expressing a desire to escape family life and retreat to the wilderness. They talked about survival skills, camping, and living off the grid in isolated areas like forests, deserts, and mountains. At one point, Christopher even tried to persuade the Canadian man to help him fake his own death as a way to escape his responsibilities. He wanted to create a scenario where his wife, Kimberly, could collect the insurance money when the Canadian man declined to assist him. Christopher stated he would leave regardless, planning to abandon his job and urban life to vanish into the Canadian wilderness. Beyond anyone's reach, about a month before the tragedy, Christopher began talking about a woman. He said he was in love with her and wanted to take her with him when he escaped. The police found her, who worked as a dancer at a local strip club that Christopher often visited. They had dated for a few months, during which Christopher frequently expressed his dissatisfaction with his family life. He even suggested that they run away together, but she dismissed the idea as silly and declined. Additionally, it was revealed that Christopher had been seeing another dancer as well. He had lied to her, claiming he was single and had no children in order to impress her in his desire to start anew. Christopher spent a lot of money and proposed that they escape to another country together. With the new evidence presented, Christopher could no longer deny his involvement, especially after significant changes were made to his defense team. The trial of Christopher Vaughn began in the fall of 2012 and quickly attracted media attention. Throughout the trial, compelling evidence emerged. Christopher had purchased a weapon shortly before the tragic incident and had practiced at shooting ranges multiple times, including the night before the family trip. Forensic experts determined that the bullet wound on Christopher's thigh was inflicted at nearly point-blank range, contradicting his claim that his wife, Kimberly, attacked him while he was outside the car and she was inside. Another critical piece of evidence came from bloodstains found on Christopher's clothing. Prosecutors argued that if Christopher had genuinely left the car before any violence occurred, there would be no reason for his wife's or children's blood to be on his clothes. Even more incriminating was the absence of Kimberly's blood on the murder weapon or on her hands, which would have been expected if she had attacked herself in the head. Instead, investigators found a drop of Christopher's blood on Kimberly's thumb, indicating she had been in close contact with him after he was injured. Further examination of Christopher's work computer revealed even more damaging evidence. He had researched methods for staging a crime scene. This information painted a clear picture of his involvement in the brutal murders of his wife and children. Kimberly's doctor was an important witness in the trial, stating that despite being prescribed medication for insomnia, headaches, and high blood pressure, Kimberly had never shown any desire to harm herself or others. The defense tried to challenge this evidence, but the jury ultimately found Christopher Vaughn guilty of the brutal murders of his entire family. He received 4 life sentences, 1 for each family member, without the possibility of parole. Shortly after the sentencing, Christopher made an unexpected claim that he had clearly remembered the details of that tragic day and had never actually lost his memory. He stated that the gunshots occurred after he got out of the car and that he then saw the bodies of his children. According to him, his wife attacked him in the leg while yelling that it was all his fault before turning the weapon on herself to end her life. This new account was deemed ridiculous and did not affect the jury's decision, despite the significant evidence against him. Christopher's parents continued to advocate for his innocence publicly. For years, they appeared on talk shows, gave interviews, and managed blogs and social media accounts that depicted their son as a victim of a troubled marriage. They also blamed Kimberly's family, claiming her relatives never accepted Christopher and made his life difficult from the start. The Vaughn family submitted multiple petitions seeking clemency, hoping for Christopher's acquittal or a reduced sentence. Many of these petitions went to the state governor, who, after reviewing the case, stated he found no reason to question the court's decision. The governor noted that murdering a family member is among the most egregious crimes and assured there would be no leniency in this case. With all this information, is Christopher really the killer? Official reports said the weapon wound was in the thigh, very close to the genitals, and could have been fatal. However, he also attempted to escape to the wilderness without his wife, a detail that could suggest a possible motive. Furthermore, while in prison, Christopher reportedly wrote a 140-page notebook focused on his life, but he didn't mention his wife or children. Instead, his writing centered on his relationships with other women, which seems strange. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Maybe Abel. There are books and films that help teach ways to confront criminals and appropriate behavior during kidnappings or critical situations. However, reading about these scenarios and actually experiencing them are two different things. Barbara Abel fully realized this when one of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S. showed up at her doorstep. On November 14, 1974, a scared Dale ran to his neighbor's house and began knocking frantically on the door. When the neighbor opened it, he found the boy covered in blood with strange marks on his ankles. Dale explained that the marks were from ropes used by an unknown man who had tied him and his Aunt Beverly while his mother, Barbara, was kidnapped. The neighbor quickly called 911. When the police arrived at the Abel family's home, it looked like a crime scene. There was blood everywhere, and the neighbor noted that Barbara's car was missing, along with her. Dale assisted the detectives by providing details about his mother, 31-year-old Barbara Maybe Abel, who had a twin sister named Beverly, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. The twin sisters shared a deep bond from childhood. Barbara consistently supported and cared for Beverly. As they grew older, their relationship became stronger, with Barbara always striving to improve Beverly's quality of life and help her manage daily challenges. Barbara was smart, cheerful, and serious when necessary. After their father passed away, young Barbara took on many household responsibilities to help her mother. Throughout her life, she maintained a positive outlook and supported her loved ones during tough times. In April 1968, she gave birth to her son, Dale, and felt immense joy as a new mother. However, she soon faced challenges, primarily due to her breakup with the baby's father. Their disagreements had begun about a year before Dale was born. Although they hoped Dale would help resolve their issues, things only got worse. Ultimately, Barbara chose to raise her son as a single mother, later reflecting that this was the right decision for both of them, as it allowed her to create a stable environment for herself and her child. Unfortunately, the family faced a series of challenges. In May 1974, their mother passed away from an illness, leaving them in shock. It felt as if their world had collapsed. Their family had always been very close, so their mother's death deeply affected both Barbara and Beverly. Despite their grief, they tried to maintain a normal environment for the younger generation. Barbara worked diligently, writing and taking a job at a radio station, while Beverly managed household chores. They lived in a modest home in Palm Beach, Florida, and surrounded 6-year-old Dale with love and care, gradually recovering from this tragedy. On November 14, 1974, it seemed like an ordinary day for the Abel family. Beverly assisted Barbara in getting ready for work, and Dale was preparing for school. After dropping Dale off, Barbara went to the radio station where she worked as a news editor. Around noon, she tried to call Beverly, who was at home, but there was no answer. This was strange because Beverly never missed calls. She was always eager to talk, but this time she didn't even call back. Initially, Barbara thought her sister might have fallen asleep and didn't think much of it, so she continued with her work. After leaving the radio station around 5 p.m., she picked up Dale and headed home, expecting to see her sister there. As soon as they entered, she called Beverly, but there was no answer. Barbara asked her son to find his aunt, thinking she might have been listening to music and hadn't heard them come home. While Barbara went to the kitchen, she felt a sudden and intense fear that sent a chill down her spine. It was a deep, instinctual dread, and in that moment, she heard a voice say, "Don't turn around or I'll attack." Just then, her son Dale rushed into the kitchen and said that his aunt was in the bedroom and bleeding. When Barbara turned around, she saw a man pointing a weapon at her and Dale. Staying calm, she told the intruder that she needed to see her twin sister because she was worried about her. This was a risky move, but it seemed to impress the man, who agreed to let her see her sister. With the weapon still aimed at them, Barbara and Dale cautiously walked toward the bedroom, trying to keep Dale away from the armed man. Beverly was in the bedroom, lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth, crying. Barbara kissed her sister and whispered that everything would be all right. Barbara noticed that Beverly was undressed under the blanket. Unable to hold back her feelings, she confronted the attacker, questioning whether he had abused Beverly. He responded with laughter, claiming he had attempted to assault Beverly but had failed. His cruel smile and taunting words sent another chill down Barbara's spine. Following this, she tried to bribe the assailant. She revealed that she had a significant amount of money at home and was willing to give him her car keys. In return, she pleaded with him to leave them alone and not to harm them. The stranger, however, expressed his desire to take her child and reach for the boy. Barbara firmly declared that she would never give up her son and instead offered to take Dale's place. The man agreed. The assailant identified himself as Paul John Knowles and claimed he had just escaped from prison, stating he had no plans to return. He warned Barbara that he wouldn't harm her as long as she followed his orders exactly. Although Barbara knew he was lying and likely wouldn't let her go easily, she felt she had no good options left. Her primary concern was the safety of her son and her injured sister, who needed help. However, Paul was determined to keep them as hostages to buy time for his escape. He tightly bound Dale's and Beverly's hands and feet on the bed. Barbara was horrified at the thought of leaving her loved ones in such a vulnerable state, but she realized that any resistance could endanger their lives. Throughout this terrifying situation, she remained calm, speaking to her family as if everything was normal, reassuring them that it would all be over soon and that they would be all right. This approach worked. She managed to soothe her child and keep the kidnapper from becoming agitated. Barbara emphasized that they should not provoke Paul, as she had no way of knowing his true intentions. Her goal was to lead the attacker far away from her home and loved ones, then find a way to escape and alert the authorities. Paul accepted the offered money and car keys. He pointed the weapon at Barbara, then got into the car and drove away. Throughout this time, Barbara was primarily concerned about her family. More than 30 minutes later, Dale escaped and sought help. The police responded to the call. They found an abandoned car near the house, which was the vehicle used by the kidnapper. The car was registered in one state, but its license plate had been stolen from another location. Investigations revealed that the car had been stolen from a man named William Bates a couple of months earlier. Eventually, William's body was discovered, strangled, in Ohio. Inside the car's glove compartment, detectives discovered numerous credit cards and insurance policies, the majority of which belonged to Carswell Carr. The man had become a victim of a double homicide along with his 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, just days before Barbara's kidnapping. The tragedy at the Carr home in Milledgeville, Georgia, was one of the most horrifying scenes the investigators had ever witnessed. A 15-year-old girl had been brutally strangled, and her father had suffered around 30 stab wounds. It was evident that the perpetrator was a dangerous individual, prepared to kill anyone who interfered. On November 6, 1974, the Carr home, located almost 7 kilometers from where Barbara lived, was found ransacked. Inside the car, discovered near the home of Barbara, a will belonging to a man named Paul John Knowles was also found. Once law enforcement checked their database, they identified Paul as an escaped serial killer. Authorities linked him to at least 35 murders across the United States. He traveled aimlessly, leaving behind trails of blood and bodies, completely indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He selected his victims randomly, unlike most psychopaths, who usually target a specific type. He took lives with the same pleasure, whether the victim was a child or an adult. He left behind a lot of evidence, but there were no hints about his next actions. Meanwhile, Barbara and Paul were driving Barbara's car when he discovered he was wanted by the police. He forced Barbara to change the radio station. She complied and noticed that he seemed to expect the news to be on all channels, while others remained quiet, which frustrated him. At that moment, she was still unaware of his true nature. Suddenly, he confessed to having killed several people. This made Barbara uncomfortable, so she tried to change the topic to distract him from his violent past by discussing the weather, movies, or anything unrelated. Despite her attempts, he continued to casually mention his killings. Barbara began to act flirtatiously, realizing that her femininity might be her only chance for escape. Barbara decided to try to win him over. She called him sweet and offered him a cigarette. When Paul asked why she was being so nice, Barbara replied that she didn't believe he was a bad person, and even said he reminded her of the famous actor Robert Redford. This seemed to work. After the comparison, Paul became much more responsive, calm, and easier to talk to. They continued their conversation as if nothing bad had happened, as if they were simply on a date. Paul asked Barbara what she did for a living. She replied that she was a news editor on the radio and dreamed of writing a book. This excited Paul, who seemed genuinely interested in her ambitions, especially the idea that she could write a book about him. He expressed a desire to become famous, mentioning that he wanted the book's proceeds to go to his mother, but he didn't specify how he planned to achieve that fame. He repeatedly claimed to have killed many times. Although she was terrified, Barbara tried to hide her fear and remain calm. At one point, she realized that her only chance to escape was to push Paul out of the moving car, but she couldn't summon the strength or courage to do it. Barbara understood that if the investigators discovered who she was with, they would likely conclude that she was already dead. Paul was a ruthless predator with an insatiable thirst for killing. He was unpredictable and armed, which made him extremely dangerous. The most frightening aspect was that they were in an unknown location, and she had no idea where Paul was taking her. The detectives discovered that he was traveling between different states, often switching cars, and that his attacks consistently resulted in death. Occasionally, he took hostages, all of whom ended up dead. The chances of Barbara surviving her abduction were deemed very slim, but her family and friends refused to give up hope. They believed she could still be found alive. Law enforcement officials realized they had to act quickly because with every minute that passed, the likelihood of rescuing Barbara decreased. A search perimeter was set up on the roads in West Palm Beach, along with checkpoints. Authorities announced plans to intercept the suspect, Paul, focusing on Barbara's distinctive golden vehicle. However, detectives were unaware that they were too late. Paul had already taken Barbara beyond the checkpoints. Paul arrived with Barbara at a motel in Fort Pierce, about 100 kilometers from the scene of the abduction. He intended to rest there for the night and had no plans to release Barbara. To avoid suspicion, they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, pretending to be on their honeymoon. Barbara felt that the hotel receptionist was suspicious of them based on her gaze. Meanwhile, she knew that Paul was carrying a weapon at his waist. To allay the receptionist's suspicions, Barbara embraced Paul and acted like a loving wife. This successfully convinced the administrator, who then handed them the key to the room. As soon as they entered the room, Paul ordered Barbara to take off her clothes. Barbara felt scared and protested, saying she was too tired, but Paul ignored her and insisted she comply. While the criminal was trying to do his dirty deed, she thought of everything that came to mind about her son and sister in order to detach herself from what was happening, but at first, she couldn't manage it. Paul grew frustrated and angry, becoming aggressive toward her. Sensing his loss of control, Barbara calmly asked him what he was trying to accomplish, which helped ease his anger momentarily. However, he later abused her. At one point, he shared with her that he had two personalities, referring to them as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, explaining his frequent mood changes. Barbara found it hard to predict his rapid shifts in temperament. After a brief period of calm, Paul suddenly ripped the bed sheets, tied Barbara up with them, and threw her onto the bed before turning on the television. Exhausted both mentally and physically, she eventually fell asleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her deceased mother, who reassured her that everything would be fine. At that moment, Barbara understood it was a sign and resolved to do whatever it took to save herself. While she slept, she heard news reports and saw Paul intently watching a broadcast that displayed her photographs alongside those of Paul. His identity had already been established. They also reported on other crimes committed by Paul that were known at that time. Barbara was horrified. She understood that her chances of rescue were extremely low. Meanwhile, Paul reveled in the attention he was receiving from the media. Barbara recognized that he desperately wanted to become famous. Later, Paul went to sleep, tying his leg to Barbara's to prevent her from escaping. By November 15, the police still had no leads on her whereabouts. The search for Paul had escalated to a national scale. Headlines in all newspapers and on television shouted that the most dangerous criminal in the country was killing again. Barbara woke up in the morning next to Paul. She had barely slept the entire night, terrified to be tied to one of America's most wanted criminals. Paul took her to the nearest diner for breakfast. While he eagerly devoured scrambled eggs, toast, pancakes, and orange juice, Barbara couldn't eat anything. She glanced around nervously, hoping someone would recognize her, while also looking for ways to escape. However, she quickly noticed that Paul's weapon was aimed at her. He warned her not to make any sudden movements. To her dismay, she realized that no one seemed to recognize them. despite the extensive news coverage and radio alerts. Barbara understood that she couldn't rely on anyone for help. She was too scared to scream or ask for assistance, fearing it would only worsen her situation. She decided to keep playing her role, believing it would save her life. She buried her face in the plate and had a small breakfast. Afterward, Paul and Barbara returned to the motel, where he abused her again. Initially, she fought back, which only fueled his anger. At one point, Barbara feared for her life, believing he might not stop in his rage. However, she managed to save herself once more by employing her understanding and psychological tactics. She stayed calm, engaged him in conversation, and successfully avoided a violent outcome for the second time. During their dialogue, Paul mentioned that he wanted to get to know Barbara before everything changed, clearly referring to his criminal actions. Thus, she realized that she had found a way to connect with him, and her chances of a positive outcome immediately increased. Later, Paul tied her to the bed again and stepped out to make a phone call. Barbara struggled to free herself, but was unsuccessful. Then she noticed a key on the nightstand. It appeared that Paul had hastily closed the door and locked it. Oddly, it seemed as if he had done this intentionally, perhaps to protect her from himself. A few minutes later, he began banging on the door from the outside. Barbara waited in silence, her heart racing. Through the door, he told her that he knew she couldn't speak because of the gag in her mouth. He urged her not to tell the police that Paul had hurt her, claiming he never meant to harm her and was sorry for what had happened. His final words were, "I love you, and I'm leaving." After that, the sounds outside faded away. He had truly left. At first, Barbara was too scared to move. She didn't scream or call for help, fearing he was still outside, waiting for a reason to hurt her. She wondered if he had said those things to test her, as if she needed to prove something. However, she also realized that if she waited too long, he might change his mind, and she would miss her chance to escape. Finally, Barbara managed to free herself using the sharp edge of a piece of glass from the nightstand. She quickly called the front desk, telling them that a serial killer had kidnapped her, then hung up. The administrator alerted the police and requested assistance. A few minutes later, police officers opened the door. After her release, Barbara immediately called Beverly to hear the voices of both her sister and her son. They were overjoyed that she had managed to escape. However, despite the happy reunion, Barbara was still troubled by the fact that Paul was still at large and could return to harm her. Her nightmare could not truly end as long as he remained free. Fortunately, she did not suffer serious physical injuries during her kidnapping, but the psychological effects left her deeply affected. Barbara experienced post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. She credited her faith in God for helping her family heal and chose to forgive Paul in order to find peace moving forward. By November 17, law enforcement had learned that a patrol officer, Charles Campbell, was missing and suspected he might have been abducted by Paul. The officer had attempted to stop a vehicle and approached the driver's window, but he was too late and saw a weapon aimed at Charles. Paul kidnapped Charles and took the patrol car, leaving behind Barbara's car. Shortly after, the police vehicle was found abandoned on the roadside while Paul was trying to stop another driver, James Mayer. Now, Paul had two hostages, whom he later transferred to another vehicle after killing the driver. About 100 kilometers into Georgia, a gas station employee noticed a man in uniform acting strangely in the back seat of one of the vehicles that had pulled in. He promptly alerted emergency services. After the vehicle left, the employee reported his observations, which helped law enforcement identify the car and its location. They initiated a chase and managed to intercept the vehicle. However, Paul refused to stop, even with flat tires. Driving on flat tires didn't last long. He lost control and crashed into a barrier. Paul abandoned the vehicle and fled into the woods. The police chased him closely, and explosions were heard from the forest. Despite this, Paul managed to escape again. The following day, a hunter saw Paul in the woods. He noticed that Paul was injured and reported the sighting to the authorities. Eventually, Paul was captured and refused to reveal the location of Charles and James, the driver of a stolen car. On December 18, about a month after their abduction, they were found tied to a tree in Georgia, both dead from wounds inflicted by a weapon. News of Paul, the most dangerous serial killer, spread on television, bringing relief to Barbara and her family. She had spent over a day in captivity and fully realized the threat the detectives were facing. Barbara remembered that he had escaped from prison before and feared it could happen again, leaving her and her family feeling unsafe for a while. They moved in with relatives, but this offered little comfort to Barbara. Barbara understood that she could only find peace if Paul could never harm anyone again. During this time, she faced significant psychological struggles. On the way to prison, Paul had a devious plan in mind. He was placed in the sheriff's car, and they drove to the location. The driver and accompanying officer were unaware that Paul had a paperclip with him. During the drive, Paul waited for a moment when the officers were distracted and managed to pick the lock on his handcuffs. A struggle broke out, and he seized the officer's weapon. Fortunately, the sheriff reacted quickly. He attacked Paul, emptying his entire magazine, realizing that both were in mortal danger and only decisive action could save their lives. Paul had died. This news brought immense relief to Barbara, her family, and many others who had been anxiously following the villain's actions across the country. Finally, he could no longer pose a threat, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. After much contemplation, Barbara ultimately decided to stay in her home instead of moving. Although she was going through a difficult time, the house held memories of her mother and the joyful moments of her childhood. Among these memories was her miraculous escape from one of the most dangerous serial killers in the U.S. during the 1970s. As she worked to heal from her trauma, Barbara married Jim Abel. Despite the challenges she faced, including surviving cancer, she raised Dale. Motivated by her experiences and perhaps Paul's quest for notoriety, Barbara wrote a book detailing her abduction from her own perspective. She vividly described the horrors she faced with the killer and focused on the strategies she used to escape the fate that befell many of his victims. Sadly, her sister Beverly, who passed away from cancer in 2019, never had the chance to read Barbara's book, published in 2021, but Beverly was involved in the early stages of its creation and supported her sister throughout the process. As it turned out, besides Barbara, there was another survivor named Sandy Fox, who was also a writer. There is a theory that Paul intentionally left these two women alive so they could write books about him and make him famous. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Linda Curry. To avoid tragedy, sometimes it is enough just to walk away, to leave someone who behaves strangely and potentially dangerously, but in some heartbreaking cases, the victim and the killer remain fated to be together. Leading to an irreversible outcome, Linda was once a charming woman with impeccable taste. She balanced her career during the week with dancing on weekends, which helped her relax and stay active even in her 40s. She looked stunning with her education. Linda achieved professional success, earned a good income, and maintained her perfect image. In 1989, she met Paul Curry at work. Paul quickly impressed Linda with his intelligence. Their relationship gradually developed into marriage, which took place on September 12, 1992, in Las Vegas. Compared to the accomplished Linda, Paul seemed rather ordinary, leaving many to wonder why such a successful woman was attracted to him. Although Linda spoke of him with admiration, their friends felt the couple lacked harmony. Paul was short and not particularly noticeable. Except for his intelligence, he lacked wealth and career success, which he often attributed to his age. Many found Linda's choice unusual. Her friends felt she was simply flattering herself by being with a younger man who was 13 years her junior, about a month after the wedding. Linda called her friend Mary Siebold to tell her that Paul wanted to buy her $1 million life insurance policy, and Paul is the beneficiary. Soon after, Linda began to experience strange and disturbing changes in her life. Previously full of life and energy, she was now tired all the time, and her appearance was affected. These symptoms caused Linda's relatives and Mary to begin to suspect that Paul might be the cause of Linda's declining health. Paul firmly denied these suspicions and even threatened to sue Mary for slander after she made some unfounded comments. However, this did not alleviate her suspicion that Paul might be behind Linda's difficulties. Mary continued to contact Linda and noticed that she was becoming increasingly weak, sensing that something was wrong. Mary advised Linda to leave Paul, believing that he could be a threat. However, Linda insisted that Paul was not the cause of her health problems. She often spoke highly of Paul, describing him as a loving and devoted husband who showed his affection through compliments and romantic gestures. Linda believed that her problems could stem from the stress of her job rather than her relationship. Despite seeing doctors regularly, Linda's health continued to worsen. The medications prescribed had no noticeable effect. Back in the 1960s, when Mary and Linda worked at a nuclear power plant, Linda was known for her impeccable fashion sense, and Mary was often surprised by how she maintained her figure despite enjoying food. During their regular meetings at work and outings, the two women formed a strong bond, sharing everything about their lives. Mary admired Linda's exceptional taste as she skillfully matched outfits, shoes, bags, and accessories. Mary and Linda shared a passion for fashion and beauty. They were also ambitious, career-focused individuals determined to succeed in their respective fields. Linda advanced quickly in her career. She started as a secretary and eventually became a manager with her own office. Linda had been married twice, but had ended both marriages. Afterward, she began a long-term relationship with an insurance agent named Bill Sandretto. They dated for over 8 years, but they never chose to get married. Primarily because Bill valued his independence, Linda and Bill went through multiple breakups during this time, but they always reconciled since the 1980s. Linda has become the head of the department and started earning a good income. Linda was enthusiastic about spending money, but she made an effort to avoid impulsive purchases. She managed her budget well and planned to make several major purchases. In addition to maintaining her fashionable appearance, she bought a car and a spacious house in San Clemente, California. This house was the dream home she had envisioned for many years. Finally, she was able to buy it for herself, marking a significant milestone that confirmed her success. This achievement filled Linda with pride. In early 1989, around the time of Linda's 45th birthday, her relationship with Bill came to an end. Paul, a consulting engineer hired at her company, frequently encountered her. He had a background in nuclear engineering and was a young professional with experience in power plant safety organization. However, he was seen as somewhat eccentric and quickly earned a reputation for being selfish and arrogant. His behavior was often deemed unacceptable, and he used his intelligence as an excuse for it. While Paul was indeed intellectually gifted and outperformed many of his colleagues based on his achievements, he also claimed to have won $26 in the lottery on his first try, which he attributed to careful calculation. Additionally, he belonged to an international community of high IQ individuals and often showcased his certificates. However, aside from that, he lacked any notable accomplishments. Paul was intelligent and charming, which impressed his boss, Linda, who quickly fell in love with him after 3 years of dating. They decided to marry. Fulfilling a long-held dream of Linda's, Linda often described their relationship as very loving, which seemed to justify her choice, even though she later confided to friends that there was no intimacy between them. As Paul showed little interest shortly after their marriage, Paul suggested they merge their finances. Linda contributed most of the income to their household, although they had plenty of money initially. Linda soon realized that her salary was not enough to cover their expenses. Despite her careful budgeting in the past, she found it increasingly difficult to save, and her funds were nearly depleted each month before her next paycheck when she investigated the issue. She discovered that Paul had been using their joint finances to support 2 ex-wives and 3 children, whom Linda had not known about before their marriage. He dismissed this as a minor deception, and unfortunately, Linda believed him. This revelation surprised her friends, as she had always been financially responsible. As their marriage continued, Paul displayed increasingly suspicious behavior, leading to repeated concerning incidents, along with the story of the insurance contract. This raised red flags since he entered the marriage without any assets. While Linda owned a large mansion, multiple cars, and had invested in designer renovations, she still dressed elegantly and had a taste for expensive items, none of which Paul possessed. Paul must have known that his wife already had several life insurance policies in place, but he was not listed as a beneficiary on any of them. Her sister, ex-boyfriend, and other close relatives were. Instead, there seems to be no good reason for a new insurance policy. Many suspect that his motives were driven by a desire to gain financially in the event of her death, and many began to seriously fear that he would not just wait for such events, but might somehow expedite the process. Just 6 months into their marriage, Linda began to doubt her husband's true intentions. Around this time, her friend Frankie Thurber went through a divorce and found herself in a tough situation. In 1993, Linda offered Frankie a temporary place to stay in her mansion. Influenced by Frankie's experiences, Linda started to question whether her husband genuinely loved her, thinking he was trying to exploit their relationship. As a result, she asked Frankie not only to stay with her, but also to keep an eye on Paul and report any suspicious behavior. Even Frankie noticed that Paul had strong feelings for Linda, which showed in his actions. Although Paul wasn't wealthy and couldn't shower her with gifts, he expressed his love by taking care of her. He would cook delicious meals and pamper her with treats when she came home from work, followed by running a hot, foamy bath for her. This daily ritual became Linda's favorite. Observing this, and after listening to Frankie, even Mary eventually agreed that Paul seemed to be a loving husband, dedicated to making his wife happy. In June 1993, just before their first wedding anniversary, Linda's health began to decline. She experienced a mysterious illness, feeling persistently unwell without any typical symptoms of common ailments, like a cold. Instead, she suffered from ongoing stomach issues. Her condition worsened rapidly, and within a few days, she was hospitalized. By then, Linda was unable to get out of bed, shocking everyone around her, including her doctors. As she was once a healthy and vibrant 45-year-old woman, despite extensive examinations, the cause of her illness remained undetermined. In early July 1993, Linda was admitted to a hospital in Samaritan due to gastrointestinal problems. She was given a private room and assigned a qualified nurse for her care. Paul, her husband, stayed by her side and did everything he could to support her. 2 days after the admission, the nurse connected Linda to an IV for hydration and briefly left to attend to another patient. When the nurse returned, she noticed something alarming. The saline bag appeared unusually dark. The fluid looked cloudy and slightly yellowish, suggesting that something might have been added to it. The nurse quickly disconnected Linda from the IV, took the bag for lab analysis, and reported her findings to the hospital management. On that day, Linda received a visit from her ex-boyfriend Bill, who was shocked by her frail appearance. Linda looked emaciated, as if she was struggling to survive. Within a week, she decided to go home, despite having difficulty walking, and was discharged from the hospital. However, her happiness was short-lived. Just 21 days later, she was readmitted due to a stroke. Linda nearly died, but was saved at the hospital. Subsequently, an analysis of her IV bag revealed a dangerously high dose of the painkiller lidocaine, which should not have been present for intravenous use. The medical center's management contacted the police, prompting an investigation that focused on one suspect, Paul, who was accused of attempting to poison his wife. Despite these alarming developments, Linda maintained that she loved Paul and had no plans to leave him? Did she realize that he might be the poisoner? It's possible that she simply pushed such thoughts away and didn't want to believe them. Meanwhile, her friends and family rallied against Paul, urging Linda to end the relationship for her safety. Nevertheless, she chose to stay with him. Linda eventually recovered from her mysterious illness, but the investigation into the poisoning stalled without any conclusions. Just 5 months later, in December 1993, Linda fell ill again with the same mysterious illness that doctors could not diagnose. Paul took her to a different hospital in Mission Viejo, where no one knew him, although he expressed distrust in the local specialists. The doctors there largely repeated the same diagnoses and conclusions as before. It appeared that Linda was being poisoned slowly. The medical staff also began to suspect her husband, who was always nearby. A nurse was assigned to monitor and care for Linda. She secretly communicated with Linda and warned her that her husband might have ulterior motives. A few days later, a similar incident occurred to one that had happened 5 months earlier. The nurse had briefly stepped out, leaving Paul alone with Linda. When the nurse returned, Paul was missing, and the IV drip bag looked different. It was later analyzed and found to be contaminated with unknown substances. The medical staff was already suspicious of Paul, believing he might be involved in an attempt to harm Linda to ensure her safety. They even placed a warning sign at the entrance of her room, with the content prohibiting Paul Curry from entering without an escort. The police were called back to Linda's room, where she explained that Paul had significant credit card debts, yet she insisted he was a wonderful, devoted, and loving husband. She maintained that he was very kind and could never harm her. It was possible that both medical institutions had misjudged the situation. When investigators interviewed Paul, he insisted that he had no idea what was happening to his wife and was simply waiting for her recovery. However, case records revealed a troubling discovery during searches of their mansion. In Paul's room, on his dresser, were all the life insurance policies taken out on his wife. This raised suspicions after Linda was discharged from the hospital. She spoke with Frankie, who confirmed that she had not placed the documents there, which meant Paul had done it. There was no one else involved. It was evident that Paul aimed to profit from her death. Despite this, Linda did not believe he was capable of such a terrible act. Nearly 6 months later, on June 9, 1994, Mary received an email from Paul, informing her that Linda was feeling worse than ever and that an ambulance had been called. He believed Linda was dying and urged Mary to come and support her. Later, around midnight, Paul called 911, claiming he had awakened to find his wife not breathing. In subsequent conversations with Linda's family and the police, he maintained that he sensed something was wrong, saw that Linda was barely breathing, and tried to perform artificial respiration, but she did not respond, prompting him to call for emergency help. By the time Linda arrived at the hospital, she had already died. Paul appeared to be a heartbroken widower, crying on the shoulders of Linda's family and friends, while they all quietly suspected him of murder. During the autopsy, the forensic expert found an unusual mark behind Linda's right ear, which they believed might be a sign of a syringe injection. A toxicology report later showed that Linda had a lethal amount of nicotine in her blood. This was particularly puzzling since Linda had never smoked. How could nicotine have entered her system? Consequently, her death was ruled a murder. But authorities found no evidence linking Paul to the crime. There were no syringes or needles at the scene, and the IV bags from previous cases did not have Paul's fingerprints. Meanwhile, Paul attempted to claim $1 million in life insurance from his deceased wife because he had previously successfully convinced Linda to purchase a new policy. Soon after Linda's death, it was discovered that she had handwritten a note, leaving half of her estate to her sister. This infuriated Paul, who sought legal advice to claim the entire inheritance, but he was unsuccessful. Everything had to be divided. In the end, Paul Curry collected $419 from Linda's 2 life insurance policies and her retirement plan. It also came to light that all of Paul's educational and professional credentials were forged. Even the supposed International Organization of Intellectuals was a scam. He hadn't even graduated from college. As a result, he was fired from his job. Now, these incidents were decided to be viewed in a new light. In 2002, the former state prosecutor retired, and a new one took over, showing immediate interest in Linda's case at the time of Linda's death. He was still in law school, but he had since become the district attorney and was eager to make a name for himself. He was particularly intrigued by the media used to store evidence from the mid-90s, especially the extensive analysis of microcassette analysis. All conversations with suspects and witnesses had been recorded, including an interview with Linda conducted shortly before her death while she was in the hospital in August 19, 1993, during the investigation. Authorities believed Linda was a victim of poisoning and sought to identify any potentially dangerous individuals in her life who might want to harm her. Mary quickly named one suspect, Paul Curry. He had the most significant motive. He stood to gain $1 million from insurance and ownership of his wife's property. The new prosecutor investigated the background of Paul and found that his entire life was based on deception. A poison expert specializing in substances like nicotine was consulted for the case. He determined that the nicotine level in the victim's blood was 4 to 5 times higher than a lethal dose, which could not have resulted from smoking alone, given the forensic expert's initial findings. It was concluded that Paul had administered a fatal injection discreetly behind Linda's ear. Death occurred approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, leaving no chance to save Linda. In addition to nicotine, significant amounts of a sedative and sleeping pill were detected in her blood. It appeared that he first sedated his wife to administer the lethal injection without raising suspicion. Adding the sleeping pill was easy for him since he often cooked for Linda and experimented with different sauces and spices. A neighbor testified that Paul went to the store for cigarettes that evening. However, it was clear that Linda could not have absorbed such a high dose of nicotine even if she had smoked 5 packs. The nicotine must have been injected. After losing his job, Paul relocated to Kansas, where he remarried and had a son. He initially worked as a used car salesman and did well, but later grew bored and switched to being a building inspector. During this time, he had never broken the law and seemed to be a good family man and a respected member of the community. On November 9, 2010, Sergeant Schull questioned Paul Curry under the pretense of questioning him as a potential witness in an unrelated case. In reality, they aimed to discuss Linda's death. Paul, believing they were out-of-state police officers unfamiliar with him and his late wife, began talking freely when asked about his past relationships. Without requesting any identification, to the officer's surprise, he shared a story that contradicted his earlier statements. This led to the decision to arrest Paul Curry for revealing too much information. 16 years after his wife's death, Paul was finally held accountable. Unfortunately, justice did not hurry, and he did not appear in court until September 2014. During this time, he had spent all that time in jail. Paul faced charges of premeditated murder, which, according to state law, could result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The defense attorney employed a typical strategy of denial, arguing that the prosecution lacked direct evidence connecting Paul to Linda's murder. The defense claimed that Linda had given herself a nicotine enema, supposedly based on someone's suggestion of this unusual treatment for her stomach pain. Meanwhile, the prosecution stated that a sedative was found in her blood. Noting that there was no prescription for it and that it wasn't provided by the hospital, they alleged that Paul had given his wife the drug to sedate her before the murder. The prosecution also claimed that Paul was the only person in Linda's life with a serious motive and had been alone with her for at least 6 hours prior to her death, clearly having done something to her, as there was no one else who could have done it. After both sides presented their arguments, The jury went into deliberation, which lasted a day and a half. As a result, Paul Curry was found guilty of first-degree murder with the intent to profit, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Paul never admitted his guilt, so the exact circumstances surrounding Linda's death remain a mystery. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Abby Hernandez. It was a normal fall day in the small town of Conway, New Hampshire. The trees were in full bloom, with bright reds and yellows, and a cool breeze filled the air. Life went on as usual, with students rushing to class and parents going about their daily business. For Abby Hernandez, it was just like any other day. She quickly woke up, packed her things, put on her new shoes, and headed to school. She was energetic, smart, and friendly. Her classmates often commented that everything was more fun when she was around. Abby loved nature and enjoyed hiking. No one could have guessed that these hikes would lead to a nightmare that would change her life forever. That night, Abby didn't come home, and the whole town was in chaos, wondering how such a cheerful and responsible girl could have disappeared. Abby's story illustrates the dangers of trusting someone who initially seems nice. Abby just wanted help getting home, but ended up in a dangerous situation. Born on October 12, 1998, Abby was the youngest of two daughters in her family. Xenia Hernandez, Abby's mother, worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her father was a salesman. Overall, Abby's family was happy and well off. However, during Abby's high school years, her parents decided to divorce. Shortly after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, leaving Abby and her sister to live with their mother. Although Abby's father continued to provide financial support, his relationship with his daughters was limited to brief greetings. From a young age, Abby had many friends and frequently changed her interests. Eager to explore new ones, she participated in sports, enjoyed drawing and photography, read a lot, and learned foreign languages easily. At the age of 12, Abby joined a local outdoor club where she enjoyed hiking and climbing. She also learned outdoor survival skills that she applied in her adventures. In early October 2013, Abby was preparing for her school holidays and her birthday. She planned to go hiking with her outdoor club and had received a new pair of hiking boots. However, the shoes were a bit tight, so Abby decided to go to school to get used to it. On October 9, the girl went to school as usual and promised her mother that she wouldn't come home late. By 5 p.m., her mother, Xenia, was starting to worry because Abby still hadn't come home, and her phone was dead. After a few hours without seeing Abby, Xenia decided to find out where she could be. Abby had left school immediately after classes, saying goodbye to her friends at the bus stop and choosing to walk home. Since no one had seen Abby after school, Xenia and her older daughter reported her missing to the police. A search began immediately. The police acted quickly, starting by interviewing anyone who might have seen Abby that day, including her friends, teachers, and neighbors. They confirmed that Abby had last been seen around 4 p.m. as she left the school grounds to walk home through the park, a route she took almost every day. The route was familiar to both her and her family. Police began searching the park that Abby had passed on her way home. Local volunteers and members of her club scoured the forested and scrubby trails, but found no signs or clues. Abby's phone was turned off, and no signal was recorded from it. Over the next few days, police focused on tracing her possible route. They requested footage from the surveillance cameras at nearby intersections and in the park. One of the parking lot cameras captured Abby. She was wearing a school uniform and new shoes, walking calmly down the sidewalk without looking back. A few minutes after the recording, a dark-colored car entered the camera's view, seemingly headed toward her. This discovery became the first lead in the investigation. Police began checking for cars matching the description that had been in the park area that day. Unfortunately, they were unable to find any matches. Abby's story quickly became headline news on local television stations. The family recorded a distress call, and Xenia publicly urged the kidnapper to bring her daughter home. A week passed, and the chances of finding Abby alive decreased. Locals continued to search, but with no new leads. The investigation was put on hold. Despite this, the family remained hopeful. Abby's classmates and friends organized an event at school. They attached her photo to their backpacks and shared information about her disappearance on social media. Meanwhile, police noted that Abby's phone had been turned off shortly after she went missing, suggesting that the kidnapper may have intentionally turned off the tracking feature. Indicating that the abduction was premeditated, police also looked into Abby's family history. Although her parents had divorced years ago, they questioned all family members, including Abby's father. In cases like this, every possibility is considered, but her father had an alibi. He was in another city at the time of Abby's disappearance, so he was eliminated as a suspect on October 15. 6 days after Abby went missing, police received an unexpected call from a resident in the nearby area. He reported seeing a dark-colored car, similar to the one captured on security cameras, parked in an abandoned lot next to an old warehouse. The task force quickly went to investigate, but when they arrived, the car was gone, however. They did find a piece of plastic that may have fallen from the bumper in the tall grass. Along with tire tracks, this evidence prompted the police to continue searching for the car. Meanwhile, Abby is locked in a room. She is tied up. Her kidnapper, a man in his 30s with long, unkempt hair, introduces himself as Nathaniel. He says he won't hurt her as long as she obeys him, but his behavior becomes increasingly erratic. Abby soon realizes that her kidnapping is part of a carefully planned plot. Despite her fear, she focuses on staying calm and recalls her survival training. She pays close attention to her surroundings, the layout of the room, and how often her kidnapper appears. She takes note of anything that could help her escape or provide information to her rescuers. Abby quickly realizes that her kidnapper is mentally unstable. He can be friendly at times, even bringing her food, but he also threatens her. If she asks too many questions, Nathaniel does not explain why she was kidnapped, but makes it clear that she will be there for a long time. Abby tries to keep her composure to avoid provoking him. The basement is dark and nearly empty, creating a stuffy atmosphere. She can smell dampness and dust, and the only sound is the echo of her captor's footsteps. Nathaniel frequently checks her bindings to make sure she cannot escape. However, Abby notices that he has tied them too loosely. When he leaves the room, she begins to shake the chair in an attempt to loosen the ropes. She almost succeeds, but Nathaniel returns just in time. He warns her not to try again, or she will suffer the consequences. After that, he begins to watch her more closely. Meanwhile, the police continued to search for the car, analyzing the footage. They determined the make of the car by examining tire tracks and some plastic debris left in the parking lot. They identified the car they were looking for and began checking with owners of similar cars in the area, as well as anyone who might have been seen at the time of Abby's disappearance. Another witness provided vital information, reporting that they had seen a man near an old warehouse. The man appeared to be acting suspiciously, looking around and trying to avoid attracting attention. The police sent a team to investigate the warehouse. When they arrived, they found that the building appeared to be abandoned, but noticed a small light coming from one of the windows. After examining the premises from the outside, they discovered footprints leading to the back door. A task force was called in to conduct a thorough search of the building. The task force moved in with stun grenades to disorient the kidnapper. Nathaniel attempted to escape, but was quickly apprehended. He resisted, shouting threats and claiming that he was innocent. Abby was initially confused and frightened by the noise, but her fear turned to relief when the door opened and she saw the police. They freed her from her chains and wrapped her in a blanket to help her feel warm and safe. The rescuers reassured her that she was safe and that her mother was waiting for her. After several days of captivity, she was finally rescued and taken to the hospital for evaluation. Although she felt mentally exhausted, she was in relatively good physical health. Medical professionals, including doctors and psychologists, worked with her to help her recover from the traumatic experience Nathaniel Kibbe was arrested and charged with kidnapping. The investigation revealed that he had been following Abby and paying attention to her habits. Nathaniel had no permanent home, moved frequently, and had a history of minor crimes. Evidence found in his car and in a shed linked him to the kidnapping, including Abby's personal belongings. After her rescue, Abby faced many challenges. While she returned to normal life, she became more withdrawn, and it took her a long time to feel safe again. With the support of loved ones and professionals, she began to heal and even shared her story to help warn others. Abby's experience was more than just the kidnapping. It showed her incredible strength, her ability to stay calm, observe her surroundings, and seek help was crucial to her survival in extremely harsh conditions. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of being cautious, trusting your instincts, and persevering even in the most desperate times. After her release, Abby faced a long and challenging recovery process. Although she was back with her family, her life was forever changed. Initially, she avoided walking alone, stayed away from crowds, and regularly checked her windows and doors before going to bed. Gradually, she began to feel safer and started to rebuild her life. Abby was determined not to let fear control her life. She chose to use her experiences to help others. She began speaking at school assemblies and community events, emphasizing the importance of always being mindful and prioritizing personal safety. Her story resonated with many, inspiring other trauma survivors. Her kidnapper, Nathaniel Kibbe, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. During the trial, Abby took the stand and expressed her thoughts. Her words symbolized her resilience and marked her victory over the terrible fear he had tried to instill in her. Years later, Abby discovered her passion for working with organizations that support children and young people. She played a key role in creating safety programs to ensure that others would not have to face the same situation she endured. Her determination and strength helped her regain her joy in life. Despite the traumatic experiences she faced,